The real tragedy, especially if you're an artist, is your content really only gets used once. Players charge through all that beautiful stuff you've made, this narrow pipe devouring all your hard work, and you really have very little reason to return to those spaces. And we didn't want Destiny to work like that. We wanted to build a big world that encouraged you to explore off that path, a world that evolved and was always giving you new reasons to come back to all that art we made.
When you're world building, once you know the heart of your world, you can build around it. But if you don't define your heart up front, all you're really doing is spinning your wheels in a pile of awesome concept art.
Destiny obviously isn't the story of one man or even one group of people. It's the story of the world, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe. Huge. How has your technique, what tools narratively have you been finding yourself moving towards in order to tell this much larger story?
Well, I think if you like the way that we tell stories at Bungie, we're cinematic storytellers. We like that approach to storytelling. But the great thing about Destiny, I would just say, is that for us, story isn't confined to the campaign in this world. Story informs other activities that you'll be playing in as well, in a way that we never really could with Halo. So I can't talk too much about it today, but I would just say when you're building a big world, you want that narrative to go everywhere. Mm-hmm. And most importantly, the story that you're telling, the legend that you're building, it follows you from every activity. The character that you are in campaign is the character you are in multiplayer. And so it's really about creating one cohesive story across all the activities. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
This is the ramblings of a casual, mostly solo player mix of Steam and Xbox Series X footage, primarily focused on the single-player, storytelling campaign side. This is a big video, so use the timecodes to skip around if there are any sections you aren't interested in. A lot of people adore this game. It has a loyal, passionate community who will probably pick up technical mistakes I might make, but the life service model is ridiculous to keep track of. As a result, some of the points in this video may already be addressed by Bungie, but that's the nature of service games, they're always changing. Let's just get on with this.
If you like games with standalone campaigns like Doom, Titanfall 2, God of War, and Halo, then The Witch Queen is for you.
In this video, I want to talk about my casual, mostly solo experience with not only the major Destiny expansion, The Witch Queen, but also go unnecessarily deep into my general experience with this franchise from the perspective of a lapsed hardcore vanilla Destiny player, who has still played every major expansion but has never felt the game has reached the same relative heights or potential that it seemed like it was once approaching towards the end of its original lifecycle. In fact, when The Taken King dropped, it seemed like Destiny had a bright future ahead of it. It made it seem like the original Rocky launch was just a one-off event they'd learned from.
It's a day for pretty speeches and medals. But we know the real fight takes place out there.
The layered systems of rewards were coming together in a way that felt new and fresh, with a kind of new enemy type, 3 wonderfully crunchy new subclasses, a fascinating new location, creative strikes with exclusive rewards, a raid that redefined the scope of the franchise, and on top of it, everything that dropped was new loot and the leveling system was simplified and addictive. It felt new. It was starting to finally find its personality. It set the standard for what to expect from one of these larger expansions. Right, let's fast forward a bit to when Destiny 2 originally came out and was a rushed, pointlessly tweaked and redesigned version of what we'd already been playing for years, but all those finicky systems they'd been experimenting with and nailing down and figuring out seemed to be thrown aside in the typical desperate attempt for a casual wide appeal and to hit contractual quarterly earning deadlines, a move which ironically shifted me into being more of a casual fan of the franchise. Not even a fan really, more of an observer. I like it sometimes, I get it sometimes, I don't know, it's complicated.
That sounds like madness, right? We'd never even attempted to build something like this before. We had no idea really how we'd achieve this goal.
I couldn't help but ask myself, what was the point of this supposed 10-year plan if this was going to be the cycle? There was clearly no concrete idea for this. The 2 major vanilla releases were content-bare disasters, who used their unknown experimental standing in the games industry to peddle content that otherwise would have been shafted in any other context. It was bizarre to me how the same studio who, for better or worse, played a huge role in shifting the AAA industry into this miserable, fear of missing out, half-complete, always-online landscape of gear-based co-op looter shooters who painfully ascended from the depths of development hell, turning the optics around, only to then have to spend years doing it again. For me, enough was enough. This entire business model seemed inherently predatory, and almost like Bungie had figured out a way to farm dopamine for the most amount of gain for the least amount of actual gameplay design, variety, innovation, or progression. The raids were always the bright spot for me in Destiny 1, but the grind and frustration to get there just stopped being worth it for me when Destiny 2 rolled around. Previous to this, I was a hardcore Bungie fan from the Halo days, and gradually had to come to the realization that the games industry simply was never going to be like 2007 ever again. I stopped reading the weekly updates, I stopped logging in every reset to do my chores, and by the time the fanbase considered the game to be good again, with the Forsaken expansion picking up the pieces and saving the franchise, I was pretty much checked out. I made my Forsaken video and barely touched the game until Shadowkeep released. With the split from Activision, I was intrigued and wanted to see how Bungie presented themselves while free from the clutches of megacorps such as the unwieldy Microsoft or oppressive Activision. However, if anything, the scale was stripped back, with the Shadowkeep and Beyond Light expansions being prefaced by the warning that the corporate restructure was going to impact development scope. However, games like Fortnite and Apex Legends shifting the live service model into being about battle passes and smaller, more regular updates gave Bungie an opportunity to beef up the live team and carry the game through seasons, as opposed to dropping one huge expansion that everyone rushes through and then complains for months that there's nothing to do. A move which simultaneously kept the fans relatively happy and addicted, but also allowed Bungie yet another avenue for monetization, which is honestly one of my least favorite aspects of this game and franchise as a whole, but we'll cover that later.
And create a brand new way for players to, well, a brand newish way for players to enter the universe.
How to start, how to buy, is it even worth a try? I never even did a full video on the Beyond Light expansion, partially because of a waning lack of interest in this franchise as a whole, but also because the ever-changing nature of the game makes this kind of video fairly difficult compared to how static the releases used to be. To be clear, I used to be the guy who knew everything about the gameplay of Destiny, raided multiple times a week to chase the maximum power level, obsessively going through each and every checklist for content. I was there for when you needed to use an external website for public events, when you needed to use an infusion calculator to make sure you weren't statistically gimped when upgrading gear. I was there before there was a mobile game store inside of it. I was there for the loot cave. I was there for the broken Crota runs. I've done this cycle so many times at this point that it's just a part of my life now. It's the blessing and curse of a live service model. On one hand, it's kind of cool to have been taking part in an ever-changing piece of software, effectively as playtesters, helping the developers with their expensive, polished beta concepts. Over years of mistakes, learning, and feedback, symbiotically, in theory, only improving the product with time. On the other hand, I'm stuck in a position where if I'd simply ignored Destiny from the beginning but started playing now, I might be confused as to how anyone could call the game content light or repetitive. But simultaneously, it's so overwhelming, I don't know how you'd even begin to get into this game at this juncture. You just had to be there, okay? In fact, they should put that on the box. The box that will be irrelevant in a few years. The game where you just had to be there. We're at a point now where we have so many different Destiny expansions to contrast and compare to, so many different highs and lows. It's all about that waiting game. The potential of the future. They have literally figured out how to monetize potential. Destiny's a bit like the stock market in the way its value seems to wildly fluctuate depending on variables that are completely out of your control. It used to be a complete luck of the draw as to when this game was considered to be in an acceptable state. The unfortunate reality of the live service model is that it makes games pretty much critic-proof.
Man, this is one of those things. We're on our own now, and it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. It's a duck.
With the promise of ever-shifting, perpetual band-aid updates, it's easy to write off genuine critiques with the doubt in your mind being fettered by the hopeful promise of what's to come.
We're thinking about Destiny beyond just any given year and thinking about it over time.
You can justify pretty much everything with the promise that things will get better, especially when now and again they do. We have hope now. Oh, they'll get to that. Don't worry, that they have plans for that. Next season they'll deal with that. Sure, it sucks now, but they'll fix it eventually.
We haven't gotten everything right out of the gate. For example, we've already begun working on changes that we're going to make to our seasonal model in year 4 to get a bunch of the FOMO that's in the game right now out of it. And this is a response not only to your feedback, but just, we took it in the wrong direction.
The games industry often relies on your short memory and slick, expensive marketing to push out polished-looking products that are often behind the scenes, forged from a background of pain, strife, frustration, and the delicate battle of how to best monetize something as lucrative and versatile as a video game.
Like, we didn't have the design down, we didn't have the story down. Once we actually started to see how long the missions were taking to to produce and how long they were taking to design and script, and it just wasn't going to work.
Most creative industries are like this in some capacity, varying wildly depending on the nature of the project, but as I alluded, the monetization especially spits in the face of the very nature of its intended, open, social, cooperative design, and continues to be a sore spot I can't get over considering the relative value you can find elsewhere in the industry. Right, so bear with me here, this is painful. Destiny 2 is a free-to-play, asterisk, but also has major full-price expansions, an entire inbuilt store packed full of cosmetics, boosts, and items, has a skippable battle pass that you have to buy or get bundled with an expansion, is also partially on Game Pass sometimes, and they recently have set a precedent for content in between this, such as the Bungie 30th Anniversary Pack, which includes the best gun from Destiny 1, as well as containing a 3-player only activity centered around going back to the loot cave from Destiny 1 for some fan service. Why would I buy that?
Yeah, I get goosebumps just thinking about that. You know, it really gives me that nostalgia from Destiny 1.
We're at a point now where they figured out they can monetize nostalgia for Destiny 1 and add content from Destiny 1 under the guise of member, just because it's been around that long and this game reuses assets like no other.
The moon this time around is something really scary that is playing on your fear in a way that hasn't happened before. Before it was, oh, it's a big giant thing and it's scary, but now there's actual, like, some psychological elements to that.
The fact they're still charging for outdated, irrelevant content like Shadowkeep is a shame, because you're putting new players in a position where they feel like they need to buy multiple different expansions at the same time to make it feel like a complete game. But the old expansions are often made irrelevant the second a new one is released, which you wouldn't know until you play it and realize how pointless they feel, let alone the issues this causes with cross-save. As someone who bounces between Steam and Xbox, it's irritating how I sometimes need to change platform to do the weekly Nightfall activity simply because I'm missing a certain expansion on that platform that contains the correct content, which I guess is my fault for not realizing that Beyond Light was removed from Game Pass at some point. This confusing, convoluted, overwhelming nature of the monetization is telling, because this approach seeps into every individual aspect of this game. From the story, the menus, the gear management, the quest logs, the bounties, the FOMO, the currencies. It's kind of all on you, or your clan, subreddit, or Datto, or My Name is Bife to figure out. When your fanbase needs to create guides to explain to new players how to buy your game properly, I think it's time to adjust. Destiny is effectively a subscription service that has somehow figured out a way to also get you to pay even more of a premium on top of it.
When we say MMO, we don't mean like subscriptions.
This has been a growing problem ever since they added the Eververse store under the guise of it supporting the live team, proving to Bungie that any new predatory follow-the-leader game design trend designed around sapping your time and money would be welcomed and eventually accepted by the whipped fanbase. They want the pros from every single type of business model with none of the leeway or cons that at least make it appear more consumer-friendly. Think about it, the game is already built around random gear drops that you grind for and have no control over, which are basically already loot boxes you can get duplicates in, as a way to get you addicted to the chance aspect and to get you to replay content. Then layer on top of that a season pass and events that only exist for a certain amount of time, and expansions that are also only relevant for a limited amount of time. Nearly everything you do in Destiny is on the game's terms. The value of everything seems completely random and tweaked to make as much money as possible from whales. It's not a great feeling to drop a premium for a new expansion, then get a bespoke engram that you can only open in the mobile game store tab designed purely as a way to get you to browse and spend. The store, which, by the way, is full of cosmetics in the game that is all about cosmetics. I know this battle is long since lost, but this is why the "it's just cosmetic" argument never worked for me. You cannot argue cosmetic stores in games designed around collecting cosmetics doesn't affect the gameplay experience, especially when it's so obvious that some of the most fun and interesting designs are locked into the store. I enjoy having a gameplay path to unlocking cosmetics, especially when they need as many avenues as possible to reward the repetitive, grindy content. Destiny 1 was a lot better for this. It especially stings when paid-for gameplay features like finishers have no clear path for unlocks without using the store to spend real money. I know their band-aid solution is to offer a pitiful selection of items on a rotation that you can use the bright dust currency to buy, but these items are limited and again totally on the game's terms if and when the thing you want will be on sale for that specific currency. Yes, just what Destiny needs, more currencies to micromanage and remember. I was under the impression that the style of business model you go for reinforces an unspoken rule about how far you're going to push the anti-consumer practices. The Battle Pass was introduced by Fortnite as a means of monetizing a free-to-play game and encouraging the fear of missing out. The same with these obnoxious skin stores that have to keep escalating the wacky quirkiness of their designs like in Apex Legends, another free-to-play. I would be fascinated to hear from anyone who plays the truly free version of Destiny. This seems like it's mostly an excuse to get the buzzword advertisement and peddle what most people would more accurately describe as a demo. You can't do any of the real content in this version of the game, but because it led the live service charge, Destiny has been able to dictate whatever it wants depending on pushback from the whipped fans. But I'm glad they get the best of every world for the sake of their bottom line. Because I care about that. On top of all this is the most controversial aspect of all.
The fact is, the game is too large to efficiently update and maintain. We're on track to be like 115 gigabytes on PlayStation alone, and our updates to the game are huge, and we're starting to reach the limits of our ability to patch.
And that's the moral debate that has come about due to how Destiny has approached retiring or vaulting old content.
Here's our plan. Each year, just as a new expansion comes out, we're going to cycle older, less actively played activity and destination content out of the live game and into what we're calling the Destiny Content Vault, the DCV.
Due to various limitations in how the core design of the game functions and in the interest of reducing file sizes, various bits and pieces of paid content have been completely removed from the game. So even if you wanted the full context for events such as the Red War or Forsaken, crucial events in the world of Destiny that are still referenced in the game to this day, sorry, I guess you'll have to watch it on YouTube? To highlight how bizarre this is, you literally can't play the main content from this older full physical release now. It's hilarious. This is a defunct, unusable product. Like a Daft Punk concert, you just had to be there. Sorry. A truly strange example as far as consumer ethics is concerned, and highlights the unique position video games are in. Imagine going back to your favorite book and a chapter wasn't there anymore, or returning to an album on Spotify to find that now it starts at track 6, but they've added 4 new songs after track 12 to try and make up for it. Yet another example of the control being out of the hands of the consumer and a big question mark when thinking about game preservation, and perhaps shining a light on the short nature planning and thinking for this ambitious 10-year investment. A strange outcome considering you would have thought that this game would have been designed to be as modular and varied as possible, considering how its core loop from the beginning has been all about grinding the same content over and over, especially when content such as the Strike and Crucible playlists have such limited scope compared to the overall mass of content that has been designed during the life cycle of this franchise. Clearly it's totally unwieldy. At least now there's a handy timeline actually in the game, but I can't help but feel like this is a short-term solution to a long-term building problem. Now, I don't know how they would do this without increasing file size, but there needs to be some kind of location in-game to serve as a catch-up hub that's more expansive than this timeline. An in-universe archive in the tower where you could at least read through or watch old cutscenes to give you some context would be a huge quality of life addition to the game and would serve to help introduce old and new players in a way that at least gives you a choice without having to go to fan-run YouTube channels and websites. Even a text-based codex with minimal production would be all I need, just so I can quickly refresh my memory of the dense history of the Awoken, Eris Morn, or whatever random factoid I want to refresh my memory on at the time. Again, what other artistic medium requires this much heavy lifting before you can even begin to try to engage with something you weren't there at the exact right time for? To me, this is all about balance. I want to feel compelled to learn more about the universe because I want to, not because I have to understand the base level of what is going on. But that's the most frustrating thing. I didn't quite realize how simple the story of Destiny actually is. It's just been trickled out in the most obtuse delivery imaginable. Before this point, out of pure frustrated principle, I made an effort to not go down the Destiny lore rabbit hole, as a means to criticize the bare-bones delivery present in the final product, the actual game. But times change, Destiny has been around for a long time now, and the years of people bickering and suggesting to engage with the lore has finally worn me down. So I read a bunch and watched a lot of YouTube videos, and here's what I had to say about Destiny lore. It's neat. Now, is this anything new or groundbreaking? Not particularly. The hook, to me, has always been the presentation and art direction, the juxtaposition of the medieval fantasy imagery, mixed with the slick science fiction, the scale, the implied history of the environments, the music and sounds, color palettes, and the varied locations. Taking all of these disparate sources of inspiration and beautifully combining them into a universe that feels ancient, mysterious, yet somehow contemporary. It strikes your imagination and lets you lose yourself in truly alien environments. But these locations and vistas without any proper framing would often land as more of an interactive piece of science fantasy concept art as opposed to a fleshed out universe where the characters, ecology, and story all complement each other and build out a world as engaging as some of the material that inspired it.
You know, when you're world building, once you know the heart of your world, you can build around it. But if you don't define your heart up front, all you're really doing is spinning your wheels in a pile of awesome concept art.
At the heart of Destiny is a science fiction story as old as time. Some kind of godlike technology appeared one day called the Traveler and saved humanity from the brink of collapse, using the newfound godlike powers with the help of the Traveler's ghosts, aka light, to terraform and expand across the solar system. However, much like the Reapers from Mass Effect or the Flood from Halo, there's some kind of ancient, all-powerful evil force that acts as the central horror or mystery that gets the overarching plot rolling. A plot which Destiny 2 specifically had put into motion long ago, with these looming fleets of pyramid ships being teased as far back as the concept art for the original Destiny.
And of course, a good game needs giant onyx pyramid ships. But that's a really cool image, I love this one, but I'm not allowed to talk about those yet. Maybe someday down the road.
Bungie clearly knows that the intrigue, the mystery, is what keeps people around, as far as the story is concerned. Once Marvel started putting stingers in the credits and everyone started copying the format, it was not surprising that the game about the impending future actually started teasing and building up to the major threat of the universe. The problem, though, is that Destiny never had a good foundation to provide the storytelling basics.
Are we going somewhere with this story? Because we started it already in like a very obscure, like, what did we just do in the Black Garden? Like, what? Okay. And then like, okay, now the Oryx storyline, and then the Riven storyline, and then this storyline, and then this one, and we have 18 different branches that all seem like they're doing their own thing. It seems like we're just living in the world of Destiny and maybe not experiencing like an overall story.
It treats itself as if it's playing in a universe like Star Wars, a direct inspiration that you're already familiar with because of other media. Can you imagine playing something like Jedi Fallen Order and barely having an understanding of what a Jedi is, or what any history of this universe means or is referencing, or what a Star Wars is? Although that game has a better story in a vacuum than anything in a Destiny game, so maybe it isn't the best comparison. Part of what is so frustrating about this universe is that arguably the hardest part is done. The world building and art direction are so well researched and thought out. The creatives who laid the foundation, your Joseph Statons and Christopher Barretts, created an intriguing universe that can capture you in a single image.
Your job as a world builder is first and foremost to make your audience curious, to give them just enough information and detail so that they can begin to fill out your world with their own imaginations. Because guess what? 9 times out of 10, their answers are going to be way better than yours.
Before Destiny was in the hands of the players, the concept art and production design was so striking to me that I was sold before anything was proven, and we didn't quite yet realize how messy the production had been behind the scenes. So this isn't the case of the story or lore being inherently bad or flawed, it's a storytelling delivery problem. Production is spread so thin over the various pillars of design that a cutscene-heavy traditional narrative like Bungie used to make is clearly a lot more difficult under this game's restrictions. This is a case where officially produced transmedia could do wonders for this universe. An animated show with the production quality of something like Arcane would be a smart way to establish those world-building basics and invite you to delve deeper, if adding these things into the game is proving to be impossible. So what has happened is that over its life cycle, the ultra-limiting design of the game's core systems meant Bungie have been forced to flesh out the universe through clunky and hard-to-follow exposition dumps that have typically been so badly written or explained that trying to keep track of it was subpar compared to nearly every other type of similar story out there, or arguably more importantly, failed to meet the correct expectations that were established and set up by Bungie themselves.
Well, I think if you like the way that we tell stories at Bungie, I mean, we're cinematic storytellers. We like that approach to storytelling.
As for the Witch Queen, I'd say we're just about in a state where I at least understand the motivation and history of the major enemy factions thanks to content actually present in the game. But what a bare bones comment. I now understand the villain's motivations. What do you want, a medal? The Hive, for example, have gone from being one of my least favorite factions into potentially the most interesting of them all. When you get into the Worm Gods, the Hive family tree, their gothic monoliths, and their general eldritch design, coupled with the Hive having the best through line in terms of intertwining the ongoing story with real gameplay events and moments we've actually experienced firsthand, shows the potential of what can be done with this type of game. But this is why I always, from the very beginning, took the stance that this game needed a solid story mode or campaign at the forefront to ease you into the universe and get you through the door so you have some kind of idea what or why you're fighting beyond a children's cartoon monster of the week. If you're going to build up this game around this idea of these central pillars, it has never made sense to me how the campaign has always been sidelined when in every single expansion they still force you to play through it anyway. That was always the routine. Rush through the campaign as fast as possible so you could get to the end game and grind in time for the raid, the real content. A campaign which was usually paced similarly to activities such as strikes or lost sectors, which from a gameplay design perspective nearly always had the exact same goals, with each expansion boiling down to what is effectively an easy, extended tutorial to ease you into the gameplay loops and remind you of how the various systems intertwine, usually ending with a simplistic bullet sponge boss to mow down. Here's the level where they introduce you to the new area. Here's the level where you have to play the new strike. Here's the part where they show you how to explore in the same way you've been doing since 2014. Here's a random unfun roadblock that extends playtime because we know this content is so short and hardly fleshed out. So effectively, Destiny, until the Witch Queen now, has never had what I would call a good campaign. The soft bigotry of low expectations tricked people into thinking Destiny 2's vanilla campaign was good, simply because it had one. It's hilarious thinking back to how many Destiny campaigns I've reviewed over the years and just how little I've ever felt the need to reference the actual game design, because nearly every level was indistinguishable from the last. And we all know if a story is predictable in its structure, if you know the level design before you've even played it, then the game never puts itself in a position to surprise you. It's boring. I remember way back in the Taken King expansion there was a level that tricked you that it was over. And that was a huge moment for me because it was the first time a campaign mission advanced a formula in some way, or played with my tired expectations for what this franchise can offer. But again, remove that comment from the context of Destiny and it sounds hilariously battered and bruised. There was one level that was different, so it stood out. Wow.
I can keep reviving you, but maybe we should start running.
The fact Bungie are even willing to remove old campaigns point to me as a backhanded acknowledgement that they weren't even particularly good to begin with. Can you imagine a universe where they just stopped selling Halo 1's campaign because Halo 3 came out? The webbed model of design, where assets are used for multiple purposes, ultimately trapped Bungie into this decision. You can't just have a campaign hosted separately, without bringing along entire maps and geometry and old systems. I'm going to use this next section of the video to recap and review the previous campaign expansion quest I never covered on the channel, Beyond Light, as a means to highlight the old, unfun, stretched approach to campaign content and move on to contrast with how the Witch Queen handles it, as well as make sure I cover every major expansion for this game to scratch my own FOMO itch. We've come this far already, and as of the time of me writing this, it's still for sale, so why not? Use the timecodes if you want to go straight to the Witch Queen campaign review.
I've seen terrible things born out in the darkness. Every moment brings them closer. My future does not begin here, but yours does. It's time to step beyond the light. And it all begins with a splinter.
I played through this campaign twice, once when it first released on my Titan, and secondly on my Warlock to refresh my memory after I finished the Witch Queen on Solo Legendary. The time gap between these two playthroughs was over a year, and the difference is uncanny. When I first played it on my Titan, I was underleveled and had a miserable time, honestly, because of how pointlessly difficult it was solo, and especially with how bad the loot pool was at the time, a drama I'd completely forgotten about, where Bungie started trying to sunset weapons. The combination of this core aspect of the gameplay letting me down, and being overall disappointed by the stingy, grindy nature of the new Stasis subclass, and the campaign just not being very interesting. I mean, let's just say I didn't stick around for long. It wasn't until I started hearing about the seasonal model introducing interesting concepts and rewards that I later checked back in around Season 14. I was shocked to see content that had actually been added in a meaningful way that fleshed out the universe and had a fair amount to do, including temporary upgrade paths and story delivered through characters interacting in-game, which I know, wow, what a high bar, but it's an improvement nonetheless for Destiny. For my second recap playthrough on my Warlock, I was overleveled, had the 2022 Void 3.0 subclass rework to play around with, and the rewards were tuned to Witch Queen drops, so it didn't feel like the loot part of the game was as much of a waste of time. The lack of difficulty options hurts because I steamrolled every encounter and rushed through the entire story in only a couple of hours. A story which is by no means the worst Destiny has seen, but perhaps suffered due to this previously mentioned corporate reshuffling, happening in tandem with an unprecedented global pandemic, which would have required another corporate reshuffling.
Before we started the show today, we wanted to just acknowledge the circumstances and the unprecedented times we're in. This is not how we had planned this several months ago. to talk about the future of Destiny 2 and reveal where we're headed with the team.
I was very confused by how people would talk about this expansion, some even going as far as to hyperbolically describe it as Destiny 3 with less baggage, which obviously isn't and has never been true. The way Destiny fans talk about Destiny is the least reliable, most caveat-filled, borderline abusive relationship-sounding dialogue.
And I think some of the other main campaign stories have been great, like D2 Vanilla strikes me as like a really good campaign in terms of its story, and Forsaken was awesome, because I do think, you know, the story has always been one of those things that I assume most of the community doesn't actually care about all that much, right? Like Brian is a guy who plays Destiny every single week, and he didn't know about paracausal bullets being able to kill Cade and stuff like that. And I think that's sort of the problem with Destiny, is most people don't know that the lore is actually good, and that the characters have depth, and that the world building has depth, because Bungie doesn't focus on that stuff in game anyway. They focus on it in kind of peripheral lore books and that sort of stuff. So
the biggest additions were the Europa playspace and the Stasis subclass. Europa maintains the standard of being visually stunning and has particularly unique implications in how it relates to the lore of the underdeveloped Exo machine race. It's a shame the actual design of Europa is so stale and empty though. This is one of the pillars of Destiny I've always been confused by. The patrol or exploration aspect. For how much dev time and art assets are spent designing these open world areas, for every public event, lost sector, or the odd random activity, I never feel compelled to explore Destiny maps unless the quests or bounties force me to. There's nothing spontaneous or exciting about the Destiny open worlds. They are static and rarely offer me anything worthwhile. They usually just become repetitive hallways that lead to missions. Beyond Light is one of the worst expansions for simply wasting your time, using the huge spaces as a way to artificially extend playtime, simply because moving around is so awkward and limited. The map is obtuse and slow to load, you can't place your own waypoints, you can only fast travel to pre-decided areas, one of which had to be patched in because the gameplay flow was so obnoxious, yet another reason I gave up back when it first released. And this design is all intentional as an attempt to get you to participate in random activities on the way to your destination, to make it feel busy like there's lots to do. It's the same thinking as Red Dead 2, except in that game you might actually stumble across something interesting. To me, they're on the right lines with content like the Lost Sectors, but as is the same with every bit of content in Destiny, they expect you to run through the same couple missions that are near identical and surface level every time. If this was a pillar of the game I could sacrifice to strengthen everything else, I would in a heartbeat. It's impossible though, because these maps are the core of all content. Everything is linked. I'd at least like to see them adjust how many enemies fill these areas. Beyond Light did do slightly better with this, but if these maps were like war zones with enemy density like a Dynasty Warriors game, so you could mess around with builds and grind bounties, then maybe I could see the appeal. In practice though, what winds up happening is people have quests where they have to get kills in certain areas of the map, but then have to compete with other Guardians who also want the kills. What about that is fun? Please tell me, I'm earnestly asking. Am I doing something wrong? The juxtaposition of the robotic, mechanical design of the maps offset against the draw-dropping art direction is a shame to me. Instead of the art complementing the design and vice versa, you're stuck in a situation where the art is kind of carrying the heavy load, with the hope being that it will distract you from the surface level design. A good example of this are the Sparrows, your own means of quick traversal that you can summon in most areas of the open world maps. So unlike some past Bungie games that make excellent use, where vehicles needed to be found or jacked, and played a crucial role in the balance and movement within the sandbox, in Destiny their main feature is to flex cosmetics you can buy in the store, with the actual gameplay and speed statistics being mostly meaningless, effectively turning you into a hovering advertisement, which was part of the hook from the beginning. Every piece of armor and item was supposed to have some kind of meaning.
What'd you get?
Check this out. I knew you'd be jealous of a sniper rifle.
Oh, I do like the long rifle. What's its name?
Shut up and get behind me.
So you could glance at a player and see their accomplishments through how they choose to express themselves with the customization. However, unlike the guns and armor that can have immediate effects on gameplay and are at the core of the FPS design, Sparrow gameplay is a solution to a problem Bungie created. They knew how boring it would be to run around these empty maps on foot, but they also realized that being able to summon a capable vehicle at any point means that the vehicle has to be useless, otherwise you'd never get off it. So when you break down a chunk of gameplay like the 3 hours it took me to finish Beyond Light Light a second time, a total of over 15 minutes was spent purely boosting around on my Sparrow doing nothing. And this was after the fast travel point patch, so it would have been much worse when this expansion originally released. Not personally what I would consider worthwhile or fun gameplay, in the same game that already made its mission to demand fulfillment from a mostly arbitrary amount of time investment. If this wasn't also the same game that requires you to slowly sign in, slowly load to each and every area as you jump around for quests, slowly manage gear, slowly navigate through countless different menus all with different types of user interface, slowly look for help on LFG, slowly wait for you to find a game with matchmaking. Destiny is a slow game when you're not in immediate combat. It is very rare for Destiny to implement some kind of challenge where sparrows are specifically involved. The most interesting example being an old strike where you have to dodge trains that would destroy you. A fun idea, but in practice one of the more tedious strikes to actually replay. There was also the Sparrow Racing League, but I think they only did that once for some reason. Europa was the first map to feature some kind of weather system that actually affects gameplay, a type of interaction this game desperately needs more of. The fact that this is the first time that open world design has even considered adding weather systems says a lot. It isn't pushed much beyond a randomly triggered storm that moves your Sparrow around or carries your grenades in an unpredictable arc. To make this open world system truly shine, it would need so much development work that it simply wouldn't make sense considering how many other pillars and demographics and types of gameplay Destiny is trying to accomplish. So the odd quality of life adjustment aside, I fear this part of the game will always be lackluster for what I'm looking for from true open world exploration or gameplay. The game is still so broad. I don't know if they can or will ever release an expansion that doesn't sag in at least one of these core pillars.
Cling to your machine god. With this power, we make our own fate.
This is another Fallen branded expansion, a crucial race to the Destiny universe that, lore and story-wise, act as a more sympathetic foreshadowing as to how committing yourself to the Traveler can ultimately spell your own doom. As their name implies, they fell from grace after the Traveler fled their planet to escape the darkness, once relying on its technology and power to bolster their communities and keep them safe, who were largely shafted once the Traveler ran away, leaving them in ruin to fend for themselves and build up a lot of resentment. They obviously have a chip on their shoulder about what the Traveler did to them, and are splintered into different houses we've been fighting since 2014. In comes the villain of the week for Beyond Light, Eramis. Perhaps the first villain in the franchise to have a more complicated and interesting motivation that's properly communicated in-game. You see, Eramis was there when the Traveler abandoned the Fallen, so she saw the destruction that was left in its wake with her own eyes. This acts as a nice piece of foreshadowing for the stakes of the universe. It's not unreasonable to assume that Guardians putting their faith entirely in the Traveler could ultimately come around to bite them when the pyramids eventually arrive. This one detail adds some much needed tension and sympathetic dynamics to what have been mostly two-dimensional monsters up until now.
In darkness, there is only one truth. Death.
Kind of a nitpick here, but I've always thought this. I really wish they came up with terms other than the light and the darkness. I know it's a standard good versus evil framing, the light and the dark side of the force, yin and yang, but the way this impacts dialogue specifically means nearly every spoken sentence has some mention of one of these terms.
Light. Darkness. Light. Darkness. Light.
Darkness.
Light. 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 Darkness.
Light.
Light. Light. Dark. Light.
Dark.
Light.
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 The dialogue is already such a weak point in my eyes, that these kind of crutches hold me back from engaging because it can feel like an overly simplified kids show. I'm honestly fine with it in something like Star Wars. The tone is slightly lighter and it's a goofier universe inherently, and they also make an effort to explain what these concepts mean in the universe a bit better. The darkness has gone from this amorphous gunge in the Black Garden to being more of a paracausal power or energy you can wield. I guess visually I was always confused by how one side had a physical entity that can embody the concept of light, whereas it's only recently that the darkness has been additionally personified as a fleet of intimidating ships. Now that I can work with, that's tangible, that's the Reapers. I kind of wish they never felt the need to kill off the speaker character. What a useful tool for exposition this guy could have been if fleshed out properly. Maybe he could have been the lore storyteller in the Tower Library. Oh well, could have even recast Bill Nighy with My Name is Bife. In Beyond Light, Eramis started wielding the power of the darkness as a way to introduce the Stasis subclass. The subclasses have always been one of the most fun aspects of gameplay to me. Aside from guns, they are what allow you to add some variety to the combat encounters, and generally mess around with different powers, grenades, and abilities. The last time subclasses were added to the game was way back with the Taken King in Destiny 1, so to me this was one of the more appealing aspects to this expansion. However, unlike the Taken King where you get your new powers fairly early in a unique unique class-based mission, so you can play around with it for the majority of the new content, Beyond Light, in contrast, took a stripped-back, grindy approach, simply teasing the powers in curated moments slowly trickled out through the short campaign, with Bungie doubling down more so on the idea of unlocking new aspects and abilities through quests and grinding, giving you much more control and customization than how the subclasses worked previously, effectively reverting to how the classes worked in vanilla Destiny, where you had way more options. Bungie and their general stinginess, though, made me lose interest in how long it took to grind for new abilities until I could double up on content I actually wanted to play months later when there was more to do, a choice Bungie did not repeat when it came to their Void 3.0 subclass free update, which is only limited by how much Glimmer currency you have available. Overall, I do enjoy the feeling of the Stasis subclass. Chaining exploding crystals combined with a crunchy sound design and visuals keeps the abilities feeling satisfying. It caused absolute bedlam in the largely ignored competitive PvP pillar of the game when it first released, but I've never thought the Crucible made that much sense for this game anyway, considering how many unfair variables are attached to the loot and how stretched the development team are already, but we can elaborate on that later.
Zone B captured. Zone advantage is yours.
Beyond Light reintroduced an old character from Destiny that needed addressing, the Exo Stranger. A botched character from the vanilla storyline who never gave you any context as to who they were because they were too busy to explain why they couldn't explain.
I don't even have time to explain why I don't have time to explain.
That line will never not be funny. Part of the storytelling problem has been the pure lack of time available to tell the story. With campaigns as short as 2 or 3 hours, that boils down to only about half an hour of traditional narrative, excluding the radio conversations in-game, which I consider to be mostly supplementary. This half an hour of narrative breaks down to about 12 minutes of pre-rendered cinematics you might expect to see in a Halo game, with about 14 minutes being dedicated to vendor exposition, a more stripped-back style of presentation mostly for the purpose of quest updates and delivery, using procedural animations that are somewhere in between a custom animated cinematic and a detached radio conversation. The other style of delivery that breaks up the pace are the black and white, blotch ink cutscenes that are used to recap events of history and lore within the universe without having to fully model and render elaborate, expensive flashbacks. These tend to be my favorite as the stripped-back minimal style works well with the delivery and provides just enough visual flair to get your imagination going to fill in the blanks. Another showcase of Bungie highlighting their art teams and allowing them to flex in a way that adds to the mythic grandeur of how they want the Destiny universe to feel. Again, I wish there was a way for me to conveniently watch all of these without having to go to YouTube. I'm sure that's on the list titled Maybe One Day. We open on a familiar character, Varix, who was introduced in Destiny 1 in a forgettable expansion. I always enjoyed his visual design and voice acting, and allowing one of the alien races to play a main role in the story adds so much to help you understand sides other than your own. This is the first time I felt like Destiny was using the chess pieces it already had in play to feel like it was building on one continuous narrative, instead of purely relying on Creature of the Week side quests that seemingly have nothing to do with each other. House of Wolves had nothing to do with the Taken King, Curse of Osiris had no effect on Warmind. These events seemed to exist in a vacuum, so it never felt rewarding to pay attention. Contrasted with here, where the starting off point is a character who's been established for years, who played a crucial role in the prison break at the start of the Forsaken expansion, and is now on the run after regretting lending his assistance to the lead villain of Beyond Light, who he had a long-standing friendship with. Contrast this with something like Rise of Iron, where it's only at the end of the campaign where the basic setups start getting interesting.
Until they did.
But is over before it truly gets a chance to begin.
Darkness walks among us.
The stranger appears and steals something from Varix, who's being chased by Aramis.
That's another one. They all scan the same. Empty.
Meanwhile, your Guardian happens to be investigating an empty pyramid ship that showed up on Europa. You catch the distress signal and leave to save Varix. The introduction to Europa is breathtaking. Anytime Bungie properly utilizes the scale to make you feel puny and insignificant, like there are insurmountable odds before you, I'm into it, especially when it's an event that's happening in-game. You clear some kind of base to find that it's old Braytech, the leftovers from a Golden Age colony who used to reside on Europa. You retrieve the true distress signal and after some combat are treated to a pre-rendered cutscene properly introducing Aramis. Unfortunately, we're in another Destiny cutscene with 2 masked alien creatures who can't emote with facial expressions, so the poor animators have to do every trick in the book to make the interaction work. Aramis doubles down on her newfound darkness abilities and rips off Varix's robot arm, making a point about how it's time for the Fallen to make their own fate.
We make our own fate.
You free Varix from the stasis, and he explains that the pyramid grants the darkness power in opposition to the light of the Guardians. According to Varix, the darkness has corrupted Eramis, and that Europa was supposed to be a haven for the fallen. If we don't stop her, she'll have some kind of darkness army that is capable of snuffing out the light. Varix acknowledges the Cade elephant in the room.
Varix knows of the elephant in the room. Cade 6's death was not my intention.
A funny phrase for an alien to use in a post-apocalypse. Maybe an elephant is something else to a fallen. You traverse to an area that looks like frozen Jabba's palace, an area you'll see a lot of for the short run of this expansion. You unlock a pre-rendered melodramatic speech from Eramis, who shows the power of the darkness and loosely establishes the bosses you'll be dealing with for the rest of the story. It's basically Forsaken again. You're forced to run because the stasis is too powerful and escape on your ship. First, you do the Rising Resistance mission, which involves establishing a secret communications network, translating into gameplay of you driving around to 3 different locations in the storm, ending with a pyramid crux appearing and communicating with you through your ghost.
We beckoned. You answered. We've kept you waiting long enough. Come to us. Salvation awaits.
They even have some good points about how, as a Light Guardian, you're basically a mindless soldier who only follows orders, with no real reason to have such adoration for the Traveler aside from it resurrecting dead people with superpowered amnesia to use as its personal army. Everything about this thing has been suspicious since day one. I'm glad they've finally taken the time to discuss the implications of what this machine god is actually up to, instead of bathing in the binary of pure evil and pure good. An uninteresting pre-rendered piece of advertisement reintroduces us to the stranger Eris Morn in the Drifter.
And here comes our Guardian. Right on time.
It's a pet peeve of mine for action games to use pre-rendered action scenes instead of using the action gameplay for the same effect. If this weird ship teleported in while you were in combat and they hoped you clear the area as AI companions, that would be significantly more impactful and memorable than watching these guys slaughter the new faction you just tried to add depth and sympathy for epic marketing points. It's not like Destiny is missing on action, it's the majority of what you do. So every cutscene that wastes time on pointless action that doesn't expand or advance anything, I'm left wondering what the money and resources could have been spent on that actually give us lore or story we'll remember, like they do in the next expansion. With the camp clear, you have an opportunity to briefly talk to Eris and the Drifter. Drifter hammers home the theme of abandoning the overly simplistic light and dark dogma, and you finally get an explanation from the Exo Stranger as to what is going on and why she's no longer voiced by Walking Dead.
I owe you an explanation for all this. I once asked Guardians to destroy the Blackheart, to prevent Darkness's arrival. Success may have been achieved, but I now know that fate comes knocking sooner or later.
Just how many Hollywood actors have they had to recast because of their brain-dead marketing decision of casting expensive big-name actors instead of reliable voice actors who are actually available? So she explains she is wielding the darkness to stop our enemies where the light can't, and that because of our resilience within the pyramid, we're capable of wielding it too. I don't know what she means by resilience, because every scene where the darkness has directly communicated with us have been in instances where we're completely out of control and overwhelmed by the mysterious, untrustworthy power. She goes on to explain that you need to train with a ziggurat, which exists to tempt you, by the way, and she gives you a splinter of darkness to start your journey. From a gameplay perspective, this is alluring. The promise of a new subclass system to tinker with and unlock is the heart of the gameplay. Story-wise though, this is clunky and weird. After all this time, why would you take her at face value and not at least communicate with the Vanguard leaders first? Especially if the darkness is specifically stated to be an expert at mind games and manipulation. Your ghost tries to warn you, but gameplay has to happen so you ignore him. These 4 cruxes mark what is left of the campaign. You need to attune all 4 before you can finish, so let the busy work begin. As you commune with the Crux of Darkness in Nexus, you're temporarily gifted with stasis powers to allow you a taste of what's to come. You're briefly taught about these darkness locks you can unseal, then it's back to Varix, who also warns you that playing with darkness is a risky idea, and that you must prove yourself as a worthy opponent in order to summon Phylax, one of Aramis's underlings. So like the disappointing Halo Infinite or any number of previous Destiny expansions, we're back to the classic loop of a mustache-twirling bad guy at the top of a hierarchy, with your job being to fight your way through the ranks and eventually murder whoever sits at the top. Your next campaign objective is to kill Fallen in a single life in Eventide Ruins, a type of objective that has never been fun in Destiny, and screams to me like side filler content designed to force you into specific areas of the boring open world. After a while, random squads spawn in on the map that you have to find and take out, including a new enemy type for Beyond Light, the Fallen War Mechs, a much needed addition to add variety and a feeling of newness to a familiar faction. A change I'd hoped was going to set a new precedent for the variety and scope of each expansion, especially with how the Vex also received a new enemy addition with the Wyverns. It's a constant surprise to me just how little the major factions have been iterated or expanded upon when compared to where we were in 2014. For the premise to be a constantly evolving universe that is never supposed to be static, it's unusual just how unchanged the enemies and the way they fight are implemented. It was a big missed opportunity to take the random nature of the loot and gear, but not apply similar ideas to the enemies you're fighting. I just think about how Bungie changed the design of a faction like the Flood drastically with each major Halo game, to try and push the design in new directions and make something familiar seem new. How boring would it be to load up Halo 3, but functionally every enemy was nearly identical to how they functioned in Halo 1. And that's only a 6-year time difference. We've already been playing Destiny alone for 8 years. That's not to say that nothing has been changed or upgraded or added with time, but for the game built around repetition, you'd assume enemy variety would be one of the core pillars. I guess this is one of the inherent problems to designing a PvE-heavy live service with hundreds of different branches that constantly need pruning, testing, and control. The expectation for every other genre of game is that usually an expansion, for the most part, expands the content. Destiny simultaneously expands and contracts depending on the unwieldy nature of the state of the game at the present moment you happen to be engaging with it. Eventually, Elinax spawns in and you destroy it. The next step being to complete the Warrior Empire Hunt mission. What's an Empire Hunt, you ask? It's an activity where you hunt down a member of Aramis's council. What makes this different from a strike? I have no idea. It's just another thing to remember. A very similar formula to Forsaken, which was also a checklist of bosses to take out with minimal story or development. Back to Stranger, back to Ziggurat. Next is the next crux. Do you see a pattern emerging here? This kind of content is what I'd normally consider additive or unimportant side quests in any other game, not the leading campaign quest that's supposed to guide you through some kind of story. Pretty much every expansion before Witch Queen did the same thing. The first level is usually quite good, with the most production value and flair to get you in. Then it devolves into busy work, rarely with cutscenes or anything too memorable. Picking back up again for the ending level, which usually has some kind of more memorable final encounter. You do some more communing while you're talked at, clear some ads, and go back to Variks to retrieve some more busy work. This time you must collect tracking devices by defeating Vex in Asterian Abyss. Not fun, but I guess it only takes 5 minutes. But now it's time to head to the Vex conflux created by Praxis, another filler moment, where you sit in the open world area killing ads until you're allowed to do the next Empire Hunt. While these missions are nothing memorable or special, I do have to note that the interior design of the Clovis Bray labs are some of my favorite environments to traverse through. Whoever is deciding on these mood boards and color palettes are on point. Some basic mechanics for the boss include having to destroy shield generators before you can deal damage, or like the previous encounter where you had some kind of minor platforming and environmental risks. I appreciate the mix-up.
Without Phylax and Praxis, Aramis will grow reckless.
Perfect time for us to strike.
Oh, I guess we're nearly done here. We get to see another pre-rendered cutscene where Aramis tells one of her council to go and get the raid ready, and also to show how the darkness appears to be making her lose control and become more mustache-twirling. As much as I like her motivation and backstory, every time you see her she does angrily monologue like a G.I. Joe villain. I find it extremely hard to care by this point in the story. You go to check back with the Exo Stranger, but find that our favorite blue guy is there instead, who was excellent in The Wire. I've seen it all now. What a show. Now that is a story right there. He informs you that he has a tip on what Aramis is up to, but it involves heading to the steps on Earth. I was kind of expecting him to be more upset about the whole embracing the darkness thing. He gives a half-assed warning, but he really doesn't seem that fussed. I get he's a stoic titan, but Destiny is a stoic world. I want some emotion. This is why killing off Cayde 6 was such a mistake. Having the comedic relief wedged in between two stoic leaders is much better than two stoic leaders. Cayde was more relatable and warm, and it would have been been such a jolt of life and energy if he was still involved in the story somehow. Yeah, have the cold, stoic titan who's dedicated to his faith in the light, the wise warlock with a slightly more open mind, and the swashbuckling lone ranger who's more of an independent hunter somewhere in the middle. This drifter character is okay, but seems to fill a similar role anyway. I guess I'm still annoyed and confused by how they marketed an entire expansion around the one character of note at the time being killed off. Huge mistake. With the Cosmodrome added back into the game with Beyond Light, we can continue to relish in the content reuse. Sorry, I mean beautiful nostalgic ode to Destiny 1. Don't know who the hell this guy is, but he's here now, with the next step being yet another fun quest to run around gathering intel, aka waiting for ads to spawn in a specific area you have to waste time traversing to. Once that is over, you're tasked with completing a nearby lost sector to eliminate Bakris. While the doubling up of content is on a roll, next is the Glassway Strike. A fairly standard strike for the most part. These missions have minimal story as they're designed to be grinded out 40,000 times. It's kinda cool that Aramis is there at the end and escapes you. The more events happening in-game, the better. I'm starting to sound like a broken record. You're treated to a neat blotch cutscene visualizing the collapse of the Fallen and providing some imagery to go along with the exposition, so we understand what is being talked about.
Oh, Pawn. In another life, we may have been allies, but instead, you put us at odds. So I have no choice but to use darkness to rip, shred, and tear through every single one of your kind.
We won't let you.
Man, I wish ghosts just wouldn't talk sometimes. That's really your comeback?
We won't let you.
The stranger explains that darkness is a parasite that feeds on your most selfish desires, that it's expert at tainting and twisting you into whatever it wants you to be, that in that world there's no future for any of us. I guess your character is sitting there nodding along like a naive moron. I don't understand how what we're doing is any different to being manipulated by darkness anyway. A robot from another universe comes along, tells you how the darkness destroyed everything in a timeline she's seen, only to then say that the solution to stop this is to use the darkness. The same darkness that is known as a parasite that manipulates and controls you. Why would we not assume that the darkness is manipulating her to convince us to embrace it? I think they're trying to go for some kind of indoctrination concept like Mass Effect, but if this doesn't turn out to be some kind of ruse, I guess it's just bad writing. The text explains that by murdering Aramis's council, that somehow proves that you are good at resisting the temptation of darkness. So you're resisting the temptation of darkness by utterly embracing it and chasing it down and using it, despite everyone around you warning about how much of a dangerous, unprecedented, short-sighted, and untested approach this is. Oh my god, my brain. Next you have to backtrack to Frozen Jabba's palace and commune again, followed by my least favorite section of this campaign. You're told you have to help some innocent fallen refugees escape, because of what happened with the hordes of Vex being unleashed in the strike you just completed. Honestly, a neat idea for a mission. Its implementation is so bad though. In practice, you backtrack to the same area from earlier, take down 3 field emitters, kill some ads, the end. Would have been nice to actually see the refugees in some way before you save them, so you understand the stakes a bit better. This is something admittedly the seasonal model did pick up some slack with. They went as far to add an entire play space packed full of fallen refugees taking solace in the last city, introducing interactable objects with dialogue and world building. You know, like a video game. This one area added so much sympathy and greyness to the Fallen, something which over time Bungie seems to have learned from. Other seasons include uneasy alliances with Cabal characters, just like I was saying was needed to add some texture and interesting dynamics to what is already in play. If this interests you and you hadn't already played it though, it's gone now, so you have to watch clips on YouTube. Backtrack to Frozen Jabba's palace, but this time the Vex are there.
You think me insane, don't you, Pawn? One day you'll understand. When your city falls and your people die. When your traveler abandons you.
You know what, she's kind of right. At least, I mean, she has the potential to be right. I know she's supposed to come across as taking it too far, but how neat will this be if come a later expansion like Lightfall, and there's some kind of cataclysmic Ragnarok event that forces the Traveler to flee or even be destroyed? Then she retroactively would become a stronger character. Instead of coming across as more of an unhinged doomsday prepper, she'd be the one speaking truth in a sea of idiots. I guess I instinctually side with her because I don't know why everyone is so inherently trustworthy of the Traveler, especially knowing what it did to her people. Like, she's right. It seems like it's totally ambivalent and only cares about protecting itself, using guardians as a way of self-preservation. Kind of like how, you know, there's those birds that floss a crocodile's teeth? We're the tooth birds in this situation, blissfully chowing down on meaty chunks while the looming dagger mouth hovers above. The development of the Witch Queen only goes to confirm this trepidation, which we'll talk about in more detail in a moment. Anyway, you kill Aramis and she's frozen to death. The next step was unusual though. Destiny 2 services will soon be brought offline to undergo scheduled maintenance. Once maintenance has been, the Stranger explains that in a world she's seen, Guardians abandoned their light at the call of temptation, but somehow that's different to this world where the darkness has shown up again, and we embrace the call of temptation. This is awkwardly explained with one line saying, "But here, in this world, light and dark swell within you side by side, giving you strength," and you take her word for it at face value. The message obviously being that a balance is what's needed instead of a didactic commitment to either side, a theme they've been attempting to explore since Forsaken, and with how they've handled the Crow character since then. I missed most of that though because I didn't play every season because the story sucked back then. You attune the final floating thing, teleporting into the empty pyramid, and holding X to embrace the darkness within. Just like I do every Friday night. The Stranger admits she has some kind of truth to share with you, where she fully explains that in another timeline the temptation of darkness thrived, pervaded the minds of the good, and preyed on their desires, bringing about a new dark age. Then she admits she fears this is unavoidable, but she now has hope because of us. The repetition in this dialogue is ridiculous. So many wasted words. I stumbled across the perfect noun to describe the dialogue in Destiny, that being, let me just twirl my mustache while I say this, circumlocution, meaning the use of many words where fewer would do, especially in a deliberate attempt to be vague or evasive. A vagueness and evasiveness that only seems to exist because of the railroaded design restrictions, and the result of having to scramble together this universe after its brainchild left the studio, and they hid the good stuff away in cards you had to read on a website. Zavala calls you a naughty rascal, but he doesn't really mind that you've been using the darkness that much. It's not like a suspicious, untrustworthy threat that has literally been foretold from the beginning to be our impending destruction, but whatever. So that's the main campaign of Beyond Light over with. There are other bits and bobs to do, but for the most part that is the campaign. Done. I never did the raid despite how interesting parts of it looked. Destiny 2 had never convinced me that the grind I'd been doing since 2014 to be able to do the raid was still worth it. I mean, that was at least until...
What are they aiming at? Savathun.
Throughout this video I've implied that the Witch Queen is the first Destiny expansion to have a truly good campaign, and the truth is, this is the kind of quality I was kind of expecting from day one from Bungie. The complication arises when talking about this as the 6th expansion for Destiny 2 alone, forgetting that vanilla Destiny also had 4 expansions of its own, and every single one of these did technically have a campaign. It literally took them 8 years to get Destiny to the point where they created a more traditional campaign experience I'd be willing to recommend to someone. As it turns out, what I've been suggesting since the very first video I made about Destiny, 8 missions, only 8 missions, was all they needed to greatly improve the package and presentation of this universe. 8 fully curated, carefully designed and balanced missions that prioritize story, variety, and challenge. Fair challenge.
Witch Queen campaign, I think, is probably the most ambitious campaign we've made in a very long time.
It's hilarious watching the Vidocs about the Witch Queen, where they backhandedly admit that the campaigns they've been making all this time have never been top priority.
I love campaigns. They've always been a cornerstone of the Destiny experience. They're rich, deep stories interwoven with big combat sequences and memorable characters. They take us to remote worlds in our ever-changing universe. And so we're putting extra care into the campaign for the Witch Queen.
In marketing speak, they're effectively admitting that every campaign prior to Witch Queen was not even close to the quality of a Titanfall 2, Doom, or Halo, and I would agree.
If you like games with standalone campaigns like Doom, Titanfall 2, God of War, and Halo, then the Witch Queen is for you.
The way I see it, the Witch Queen is Destiny 2's real equivalent to the Taken King. Not only did it mechanically reinvigorate aspects of the game that have been lacking for years, but narratively it's also directly linked to the events of the past. In the Taken King, you fight Oryx, a big bug leader with a spaceship. In the Witch Queen, you fight Savathun, a big bug leader with the spaceship. who was Oryx's sibling. I mentioned earlier in this video how the Hive have shifted from being my least to most favorite enemy race in the game, and this building narrative is part of it. After completing the Witch Queen, I feel like I've truly witnessed the story progress without having hundreds of caveats or disconnected sources found online. Let's go through the main campaign quest and break down my thoughts.
It seems all I can offer are more questions. And now, with Mars returned, I hardly know where to start.
The initial mystery centers around the planet of Mars reappearing in the solar system. Now, as you surely remember, before Beyond Light was released, there was a one-time live event in the tower where the Traveler healed itself and the darkness engulfed Io, Titan, Mars, and Mercury, so they were no longer playable. A lore or story reasoning for old content going in the Disney Vault. Okay, I am lying a little bit, I didn't remember that. I watched a YouTube video of it because I didn't know what the characters were talking about when they said Mars is back at the start of the campaign. The Warlock Vanguard leader, Ikora Rey, gets us going with a clean pre-rendered cutscene. Side note, if you notice any strange or bizarre stuttering specifically in my cutscene footage, this may be something to do with the Destiny 2 memory leak issue. I only found out about after recording all of my footage, god damn it. The issue seems to get worse the longer the game is left running, so any particularly bad clips you spot were probably from a longer play session. This hasn't been an issue when playing on my Xbox, but I didn't record the footage there as early on I did try to, and lost a few hours to my Elgato corrupting, so that was good. The general bugginess is kind of unusual for Bungie as their quality bar is usually so high. However, I can imagine the technical debt being a real challenge after so many years of code rot iterating off this ancient engine. It's not really my problem though, it would be great if they could fix this. Ikora chats to Eris Morn and confirms some kind of relic is linked to the pyramids, but before you know it, the Cabal has already airlifted a huge cannon to point at the ship from Alien that was hiding in plain sight. I really like the color scheme with the arid orange desert contrasted against the looming ghostly blue ship, highlighting the scale and intimidation of the mystery laid before you. Once you're down on Mars, Eris Morn explains that Mars has returned with temporal instabilities.
We're in some kind of crop field.
What you see is a window into the Golden Age. Mars has returned with temporal instabilities, and Savathun's presence here is no coincidence.
I have to admit I was hoping to see this concept explored a bit more. It's a clever way to reinvigorate familiar areas and deliver environmental storytelling, but isn't explored that much deeper beyond this introductory level. Before you can deal with the alien ship, you have to deal with the giant cannon.
I heard Savathun went into hiding thanks to the Awoken Queen, Mara Sov. So why is she showing herself again so soon? Seems too reckless for a god of cunning.
This kind of dialogue is the necessary evil to compensate for the missable seasonal stories, so they have to write in a way to accommodate both old and new players, which can lead to repetition but is fine for throwaway ghost dialogue.
Okay, got it. We need fuel, power, and projectile control. You'll be the projectile, of course. I know what you're thinking, but trust me, this will work. My plans always work.
Now, old Destiny, this would be the end of the level, but this is only just the beginning. Nothing highlights the pacing problem this game used to have better than the way this campaign flows. No longer are you limited to bite-sized missions that are over in a few minutes. These levels allow you to breathe and travel through a real adventure with dedicated checkpoints. You know, like video games do. You know what, every time I praise Destiny 2 for implementing the most basic, bare-bones, expected gameplay design decisions that are only impressive in a vacuum, like checkpoints. I'm just going to put Tiger Man on the screen for a second so I don't have to keep clarifying that this is specifically an improvement for Destiny.
The Tiger Man. Tiger Man was wise.
Finally, campaign missions feel like an actual mission. 8 levels might not sound like a lot, but I would take 8 memorable, different, replayable, and varied missions over 20 that feel the same every time. A big part of this is simply environmental. When playing something like Beyond Light, you get tired of the repetitive aesthetic after a while. In fact, the one mission set on Europa in The Witch Queen is far superior than every mission from the entire Beyond Light campaign quest, which is embarrassing. I mentioned in that segment how Beyond Light only took about 3 hours to fully complete. My legendary run of Witch Queen took me well over 9 hours. One of the biggest differences being that the gameplay was actually fun and challenging. I did play as a warlock though, which is basically an easy mode. in and of itself, lol. The way Destiny has handled difficulty in the past has driven me insane and made me feel like I'm being punished simply because I didn't grind my number high enough. The legendary mode here has a fixed difficulty, so your power is capped. As a result, the challenge is able to be finely tuned to feel like a more fair experience. I've always enjoyed the brutal struggle of chipping your way through the hardest difficulty of a Halo game, and this is the first time a Destiny campaign has managed to successfully mimic that kind of experience. In the future, I'll definitely play the first time on Legendary as long as they keep doing it, especially considering how it allows you to skip the grind to the soft power cap, so you can move straight into endgame activities as opposed to the usual grindy flow. It even scales depending on the amount of players, and the rewards match the challenge, so the dopamine you feel once you clear a particularly difficult boss or checkpoint takes me back to what was promised and advertised about Destiny from day one. It's funny how much small tinkering with the framing can drastically improve the gameplay experience. The introduction of the throne world is Bungie flexing their art teams yet again, and I can't blame them. They talk about how they wanted this location to feel like an impressionist painting, and I can definitely see it. From the unusual interpretive shapes, soft airy color contrasts, and especially the use of light, Bungie yet again have established a setting that feels familiar yet new. The vistas and skyboxes in this game never get old to me, with some of the imagery being so innately exciting that sometimes I can't help but stare.
Did you see that moth just now?
What did you just say?
Did you see that moth just now?
Oh my god, they said it. They actually said it. They mentioned moths. This really is everything I wanted. Now, is it moth people? Oh, that would be too good to be true.
It was glowing with light. Not corrupted light, Guardian, but light like ours.
I'm gonna have to take what I can get here and accept that Savathun is basically a moth person, and that's the real reason this campaign is good. Good night, everyone. These light moths are a simple mechanic to add a bit of variety to the reskinned hive, and are established as being not corrupted light. Once I refreshed my memory on the wiki, I was reminded that the naked mole rat from Vanilla Destiny 2's campaign, that you can't play anymore, established that light can be corrupted by darkness. Or something. I hope you're taking notes. Up to this point in the campaign, there have been a couple of different mechanics established to break up the gameplay. Every Destiny player at this point is familiar with the picking up a thing and putting thing in the thing, or standing in circle and returning thing to circle. While these are not the most fun systems, I'm so glad they built the campaign in a way that helps a player learn the basic mechanics, but are usually carried forward or elaborated on and made more complicated for endgame raid activities. The single-player campaign of games like Halo, while having a fun story and set pieces, also did act as a tutorial to ease you into the systems without throwing you in the deep end. So by the time you take the plunge into harder competitive content, you have some idea as to what you're doing. It was ridiculous that this was a lesson that companies like Bungie and Respawn have had to relearn, despite being the ones to lead this kind of charge in the first place. They missed the forest for the trees in terms of how imperative a good campaign is to establishing the setting, mood, characters, style, and gameplay.
That statue doesn't look hive. I've never seen anything like it.
One of the advantages of this pyramid mystery is that there's this constant dangling intrigue of what is coming. So seeing teasers for what turns out to be the raid boss is a fun way of layering different kinds of setups. By being more delicate with the teasers, they're able to avoid the Taken King problem of the campaign feeling meaningless, compared to the payoff and scale of the accompanying raid. You pick up a fragment from the statue and briefly traverse the outside of the ship, and finally get your first glimpse of Savathun in the mothy flesh.
That was Savathun. Hurry.
This is one of my favorite combat arenas based on pure aesthetic, especially impressive considering this is achieved without yanking the control of the camera away from the player. Everything's so well placed. Before you can get to her, you're ambushed by a light bearer knight, who after you kill leaves behind a ghost that will endlessly revive it unless you crush it like the Doomslayer.
That thing is not like me. You see that, right?
Your ghost comments that this thing is not like them, with annoying, heavy-handed dialogue that undercuts the animation work and body language that communicated the same message perfectly well on its own. Half of the challenge of dialogue is knowing when not to say something. Video games are a visual medium. You can communicate ideas and story without triple reinforcement through distracting, focus-tested dialogue. Despite my dialogue gripes, this new ghost mechanic was a much-needed addition to the sandbox that completely shifts the flow of combat. Ranged weapons have usually been the go-to win option in Destiny, with only the odd enemy forcing you to move around and not camp a single safe spot. The revival time limit adds a sense of urgency to combat and forces the the player to make quick, tense decisions. These Hive mini-bosses have the same abilities Guardians do, so it's in your best interest to take them out quickly because, well, they can take you out quickly. But when you surround these tougher enemies with ads, the freedom of engagement shows that Bungie isn't quite done figuring out small, clever ways to iterate and improve the gameplay. It was crucial that Destiny addressed the ghost rules better in the game at some point, the Witch Queen being the first time they've incorporated the endless ghost reviving directly into the story in a way that is easier to follow, and sets up interesting dynamics for the future.
What is this place? This doesn't look like a Hive throne world.
You're treated to a stunning new suite of music. I really like how each expansion, going all the way back to the original Destiny, has had distinct and memorable compositions that do a great job of expressing the tone they're going for.
It was Osiris's obsession.
The Witch Queen in particular has an incredibly earwormy central theme, pardon the pun, with a great use of esoteric vocals and the familiar heavy drum beats that drive the player forward. The quieter and underplayed tracks are strangely my favourite though, but that's not to say the more intense action pieces don't land either. There's always an interesting palette of instruments and production, ranging from emotional violin, rockin' electric guitar, classic heart-pounding orchestra, and strange warped electronic sounds the Hive has typically been accompanied with. This eclectic range of sounds reinforces the same juxtaposition as the visuals, contrasting old and new to guide you through the universe. The soundtrack is often my favorite takeaway from Destiny content, having the old school Salvatore combined with a selection of other musicians has managed to maintain consistency better than any other part of the game, even despite the loss of Marty O'Donnell all those years ago.
Tell me, oh honored guest.
It's her.
How did you do it? How did you find the strength to destroy something so like yourself? It is I, Deborah Wilson, aka the voice of Savathun from Destiny 2: The Witch Queen. Yeah, wait. Oh, yeah.
Savathun is voiced by Deborah Wilson, a prolific voice actor who some might know as Seer from Jedi Fallen Order, which I referenced earlier, and was first brought to my attention with her memorable performance in Machine Games' Wolfenstein 2. It was about time Destiny brought in someone with a unique personality and voice to bring some life to a villain that would otherwise be a cold, expressionless bug.
There you are.
Wilson's casting was so important in properly communicating the deception and confusion the character is supposed to embody. The design doesn't necessarily communicate this on its own, but the voice work is so strong it carries what otherwise would have been another forgettable creature of the week to add to the pile.
So you cleared the first day. And you think you deserve a little plastic trophy and a Happy Meal from McDonald's? Are you Guardians, or are you a Little League team?
The first mission ends with you battling a fake-out version of Savathun, who escapes you while tormenting you over comms.
That was too easy.
It did seem too easy, didn't it?
You wake up on Mars and inform Ikora about what you just saw.
There's something else. Before we left the ship, we ran into one of her knights. And it
It had a ghost, Ikora. Same as any other light bearer.
One of the reasons the dialogue feels so unnecessary is because it's often repetitive. As the audience, we already know all of this information because we just played it. So aside from explaining how you got off the ship, cutscenes like this feel mostly needless and could easily be inferred through other means. Similar dialogue is repeated again when you visit her at the vendor point. I don't know if this is because Bungie expects players to miss important dialogue if they're playing co-op with their friends, so they feel the need to reiterate beats they see as crucial. Especially because right after you get a different type of flashback, ink blotch lore cutscene that summarizes Savathun's origin and recaps a story event from the season that led into this expansion. It turned out that the character Osiris, first introduced into Destiny with the famously bad piece of DLC, Curse of Osiris, was in fact being puppeted by Savathun all along. A neat idea that shows her power, which I enjoyed watching on YouTube because I honestly didn't think Bungie had it in them to deliver interesting story beats based on their track record with Destiny up to this point. It's not too important to the immediate story to understand this, but it's a shame that one of the more interesting story beats is hidden behind the live service FOMO that you had to be there for. You're pointed towards the previously mentioned Pyramid Relic, which is an excuse to introduce the weapon crafting system, an idea that should alleviate some of the pains of RNG, but in execution winds up being a pointlessly stingy and awkward system that is designed in a way that actively discourages me from tinkering and experimenting due to the high amount of resources required that I don't have the time or patience to grind for on its own. The art design of this hall is immense though. The swinging pendulum that's perfectly timed with the spinning obelisk is the creative imagery that keeps me coming back. You place the item on the relic and craft a new type of weapon, the glaive, a first-person melee ranged shield weapon that I found enjoyable to play around with for my normal mode run. It doesn't seem that useful for endgame activities compared to the other options available. Bungie are experts at game feel and satisfying feedback, and the glaive is no exception to their track record of maximizing fun. It makes me long for a bigger variety of melee weapons though. As a Titan main, it would be great if we could have gloves to hammer, pardon the pun, home their tanky role in the sandbox. I just want to punch things. The potential for more role-defining gear is endless, and while I enjoyed my time with the glaive, I feel like it still needs more work and loot variety to sit comfortably in the overall sandbox. I'm sure it's something that will improve with time, like the bows or sidearms before it.
The questions just keep piling up. It seems the answers are buried within Savathun's throne world. I need someone to go in and dig them up.
Next up is the investigation mission, where you head back to the throne world in an attempt to figure out how Savathun stole the powers of light to begin with. Luckily, you're contacted by a new character, Finch.
Hey, listen closely. You're not supposed to be here. Guardians aren't safe in a place like this.
Who is this?
Well, that's neat to know, pal, and you don't. Need to know, I mean.
With your exit blocked, you're introduced to a new mechanic to break up the pacing of missions. You're granted the power of Deep Sight, which allows you to traverse temporary platforms before a timer runs out and you have to start again. The more variety, the better, and it fits nicely in with the powers of illusion the lead villain wields. Once you get deeper into the ship, Finch finally agrees to help you.
Hey, you're stirring up the hive. This is exactly why I told you to leave.
What do you know about Hive using the light?
That's why you're here.
That's need to know.
Yeah. Look, all right, I really shouldn't be doing this, but come meet me outside the fortress. Just be discreet, all right?
There are a few combat encounters to slow your progress, and your ghost gives you more reasoning as to how strange and confusing it is that the enemy is using the powers of light.
Not sure I'll ever get used to seeing ghosts serving the Hive. All ghosts were created after the collapse. The Traveler released us just before it went dormant. These ghosts had thousands of opportunities to choose a guardian, and they passed right over humanity and chose our enemy instead. I can't forgive that.
Now it's time to meet Finch.
You brought us here?
Hey, take it easy. Just let me explain.
It turns out Finch is a Hive ghost who has made the decision to not revive his Lucent Hive based on a hunch that Savathun is up to something. It's a good idea to have an untrustworthy turncoat enemy on your side, as a clear way of explaining motivations and better exploring the concept of morality and greyness that Destiny's trying to explore in more depth than the black and white framing of everything previous. It's also kind of a fun way to characterize the ghosts, highlighting they can have independent thought and make decisions on their own. I personally wish the dialogue wasn't written to be quite as comedic and light-hearted considering the context, but with characters like Cade out of the picture, they desperately needed a more comical voice that that could lift the heavy tone just a tad. I think there's something about the visual design that doesn't quite match the casting, but I can see the reasoning at least. This mission is okay, not one of the standouts compared to the other 7, but it does its job.
There's an old hive temple nearby with Savathun's secrets inside. That is all I know. The what and the why? That's your game, yeah? And when you get there, radio me. Private channels only. Oh, almost forgot. The name's Finch. Honor to meet you. Yeah, for real.
The Ghosts is up next. You delve into a dingy cave system and challenge Finch on why he's so quick to trust us.
So, Finch, mind telling us what exactly it is we're looking for?
Oh, you know, what's his name? That old warlock Osiris? Yeah, it's his ghost. Well, was his ghost.
Wait, you mean Sagira?
That's the one, yeah.
The Scorn, who were introduced in Forsaken, an undead faction of Fallen, make up a large chunk of encounters for this expansion. They remain largely unchanged for how they've been for the last few years, even being the focus of the Deep Crypt raid that came out with this expansion. I do get tired of the dialogue that has to justify the return of a familiar faction. Oh, these guys are here again. What are they doing here?
Or Scorn? What are they even doing here?
While you shoot the wall pustules to light up the path ahead, you get some illuminating dialogue from Finch criticizing the didactic line of thinking of the Guardians.
More traitorous ghosts serving the hive. Good riddance. They deserve what they get.
Oh, so, by that logic, I should be crushed into pieces too.
You turn tail back to the hive, then yeah, maybe.
That's, some pretty blind judgment there, my friend.
Meeting you confirmed a suspicion. Siding with the hive was a choice. You all made it willingly.
Look, making a choice doesn't always mean you have multiple options, you know? Look, I am not saying buddying up with the hive was right. And yeah, maybe a lot of us do deserve what's coming. But me, I'm just trying to right my wrongs. That's gotta count for something.
I guess we'll see.
It's time for me to put my tinfoil hat on. It seems like Destiny is slowly building its story to some kind of twist or reveal that will explain the true nature of the Traveler. Going back to the Jason Schreier article and the supposed leak from a playtester who broke his NDA for the original Destiny, all evidence seemed to point to a story that was originally built around the Traveler being revealed to be more ambivalent than initially described. With how rocky and all over the place the production of the game was behind the scenes, with so much being rewritten and reworked and reused and slowly trickled out over time, it seems like now, after years of tinkering, the jerry-rigged story is starting to take final shape into something more akin to the ideas that Joe Staten conceived from the beginning. The Traveler, for how important it is for the world of Destiny, has been weirdly sidelined and romanticized in most of the content thus far, boiling down the conflict of the universe into vague, amorphous concepts, or simplistic creatures that need to be assassinated. The decision to start unraveling the black and white nature of this universe is so much more interesting to me, and the Witch Queen is a major stepping stone in shifting the framing of this narrative into something less predictable and more exciting. There's more evidence as this campaign goes on, but we'll get to that as it arises.
So to get this straight, we're heading into a dangerous temple filled with deadly scorn to find Sagira, who was placed there by Savathun.
Yeah, that's about the gist of it, yeah.
And this definitely isn't some kind of trap?
No, come on, look, interrogate me all you want, but I am not hiding anything, I promise.
Honesty goes a long way with my guardians.
Is that?
Ikora Ray, a leader of the Vanguard. I signaled her just in case.
Let's call it insurance. A watchful eye. In case your actions differ from your words.
Ikora Ray, wow. It's, yeah, whoa. I always wanted to work for the Vanguard.
I don't love this kind of Marvel-esque dialogue where characters are written to be fans of each other as shorthand to skip over natural potential conflict or development. It's strange you'd establish a turncoat and take such a comedic slant with him, diffusing most of the tension between the characters. Perhaps if it was an intentional misdirect, I'd be more into it, but it more comes across as kind of corny and annoying.
Got a boyfriend? Cute boyfriend?
That's the last of them. Let's head down.
The end of this level is a boss fight with an invincible Scorn Baron who is constantly on your tail, while playing off the established mechanics from earlier in the level with the light pustules and crystals, a thoughtful counter that builds on itself and pays off nicely at the end.
I stand before a being with 1,000 names. It whispers one. The witness. Remember it. Remember that name.
Did anybody else hear that?
Sounded like Savathun.
Who's the witness?
No clue.
Something tells me this witness Savathun mentioned is directly tied to her theft of the light.
Next is the Communion, the level I referenced earlier that takes place on Europa. The challenge is to venture into the heart of the pyramid in search of a better understanding of darkness power. Going back to the pacing, it's nice that each one of these levels has a different setting or gimmick. Bespoke, changing locations, color palettes, and environments that enforce the sense of progression, with imagery and beats that keep things varied. Doom, Halo, and Titanfall 2 all have key moments that I'll always remember, be it a set piece, the framing of a cutscene, or an ingenious implementation of a creative mechanic. This is the first Destiny campaign that has locations and moments that are burned into my head for reasons of its own merit and design, and there's still so much more to show.
This pyramid granted darkness to the Guardians and the Fallen. It gives power to our enemies as easily as it gives power to us. I don't trust it.
On Legendary, this was probably the level I struggled with most for some reason. The Cabal tank at the beginning can instantly kill you, and the boss arena is absolutely brutal. I largely enjoyed the challenge though. As far as the feeling of newness is concerned, the architecture and general pyramid aesthetic really helps to mix things up. The verticality of the design emphasizes your smallness. It's a shame it's also not complemented by a new enemy faction to fight, but I'm sure they're saving that for later.
Eris, the pyramid is reacting to our presence somehow. Opening doors, moving platforms.
Once you finally defeat the Cabal mini-boss, there's dialogue that continues to tease the entity that may be controlling these pyramid ships.
Something must control these ships. We've never seen a pilot.
You stumble into a hallway with these bizarre statues, and they don't feel the need to pointlessly drop exposition and have the restraint to leave the weirdness to your imagination. More of this is awesome. Let the art speak for itself.
Ikora said that this new ability allows you to see psychic imprints of past events. And if you commune with the pyramid, you might be able to see the imprint on Sagira's shell. It's strange. The light made you forget, and now the darkness helps you remember.
This boss destroyed me, but once I finally got over the hump, you commune with the statue.
Eris, we communed with the statue. We can't tell yet if anything has changed. It seems like we might not notice the effects until we're back in Savathun's throne world.
And with that, we're on to the next mission, the Mirror.
Guardian, the psychic energy my hidden detected is concentrated in this area. Find the source, and you might be able to learn more from Sagira's shell.
There's some more minor puzzle solving with the deep sight to break up the flow, eventually leading to this imposing chamber.
Ikora, I think we found it. There's something here.
After some combat, you have to align some strangely placed symbols.
Those distorted symbols. I can't quite make them out.
In order to unlock a portal that takes you to a new location.
What is this place? Ikora, we've been transported somewhere. It doesn't look like the rest of Savathun's throne world.
You place the ghost you retrieved on this cryptic table and reveal a memory.
It is not darkness, but something that wears it like a cloak. It gives darkness a wicked shape. I refuse to be its servant.
To give Bungie credit, the way this story is trickled out is so much more effective than anything previous. Typically, many of the answers to the big questions in this universe are bluntly explained to you by dry NPCs, or not at all. It's nice to feel like you're a part of discovering and solving a mystery that has an interesting balance of payoffs and intrigue.
Okay, here's the tip. Ever heard of Oryx? The Taken King? Savathun's brother? Yeah. Okay, I thought so. Savathun's got a temple dedicated to him.
The next step is to play the Light Blade Strike, a spin on the Dark Blade Strike from the Taken King. I don't particularly find strikes as a very effective way of delivering story, important story at least, but the design is okay. Calling back to the Dark Below raid with the weight affliction, and kinda reminding me of the boring missions in Halo 2 where you have to sit on an auto-scrolling lift. A lift which seems kinda glitchy with how it anchors you to it for the journey. The boss is fun and aggressive though. This seemed like a filler step to me, with a couple touches of interesting dialogue, but not nearly as crucial as the regular missions. I'm okay with this as long as the balance is weighted towards the missions having the important beats in the campaign, and not relegated to strikes in order to double up on development time, like they've done so many times before.
Finch, you were right. We found something. It's a piece of the Tablets of Ruin. the tablets Oryx used to create Taken.
You briefly return to the Altar of Reflection and receive the information from the tablet.
The portal that was here before is gone. We'll have to find another way forward if we want to manifest the memory.
There's a simplistic symbol-based puzzle, and you get more answers as to what Savathûn is planning.
I will never be the Taken Queen. I refuse to play second fiddle to my brother Oryx.
It feels really natural with how this story ties in with the Taken King. This is what I meant about the Hive feeling like they've been slowly developed into the most interesting and deep enemy faction we've seen yet.
Savathûn is planning to pull the Traveler into her throne world and seal it away. If that happens, we could lose our connection to the light forever.
The Cunning is next, which contains perhaps my favorite environmental artwork yet. Finch informs you of a secret underground temple.
Okay, how about a secret underground temple? Because I found one deep in the tunnels there. And guess who it's dedicated to?
Savathûn.
This mission continues with the deep sight mechanics, this time requiring you to scour the environment and shoot various symbols with your gun. Any mechanic that requires you to engage with the environment is a plus to me. It must be infuriating as a map designer seeing your work rushed through as quickly as possible. So roadblocks like this that force you to slow down and actually have a look are appreciated.
So, that's the temple Savathûn dedicated to herself.
Goddamn, what a memorable image. What's even cooler is that you seamlessly jump straight down, clear the entrance, and make your way inside.
Have you found the object yet?
The only thing here is the statue.
What?
I felt a wave of disappointment, however, when confronted with a reused Scorn boss who winds up being the main combat challenge for this arena. I think for one of these campaigns to be truly great, they'd need to introduce more memorable final encounters with the enemy design specifically. It seems counterintuitive to establish these legendary settings and environments, but populate what's inside them with bosses and enemies we've already seen before. I understand the practicality of why they do it, but any other game would have a bespoke enemy to highlight the importance of what you're doing, instead of being reminded of the limitations the overall framing of this game brings with it.
That worm familiar looks like it's a separate piece.
Of course.
Now this is more what I'm talking about. Those who have played all of Destiny's content over the years will recognize that this is also technically not a new boss, but I've always wondered why the game that is infamous for its content reuse has not reused raid bosses for single player content before, especially once it's been vaulted or is irrelevant in the grander scheme of the story. I understand that you want to keep raid content unique and compelling, but when you're trying to deliver a story, you want the variety to be maximized. I genuinely didn't see this coming the first time, and as a result, felt as if there was still more to be shown that I wasn't expecting. A rare treat for this franchise. The level just keeps building on itself even after you beat the Ahamkara illusion, turning into a sequence requiring you to backtrack and escape in a vehicle set piece, spinning the mission on its head. This one mission is more of a campaign on its own than anything previous, and I can't get enough of the potential this formula has for further expansion. Finally, the story and gameplay complement each other instead of impeding each other.
You never should have sent the Guardian in on such shaky intel, even if it was our only lead.
Well, we made it out in one piece. And if this object shows us how Savathûn got the light, the risks were worth it.
Now's when the story really ramps up. Just when you think you're approaching the end, you hit a standstill, where the portal you're relying on won't open. You head back to Ikora, but find her being berated by the guy from The Wire.
Ikora, why would you keep this from me? If I had known...
I didn't keep anything from you, Zavala. Not intentionally.
It's nice to see scenes of characters interacting in-game without it being pre-rendered. Personally, I prefer the look of in-engine cutscenes over the glossy polish of the others. The conflict makes sense, we know where each character stands, and it even manages to include your presence without it feeling like you're a guardian on the wall. The stakes are clear, there are character dynamics at play, there are still mysteries to solve. It may not seem like much, but the progress since where we came from is admirable. It's just a shame it took nearly a decade to get there. It's time for the penultimate mission, the last chance.
Eris, we're in position. Where are we headed?
Your destination lies deep within the fortress, Guardian, in the Apothecary Wing. There you should find a particular shard of crystal. Before her lucent transformation, Savathûn was in the custody of the Awoken, securely bound within a crystalline cell. Or so it seemed.
So this crystal is a piece of her former prison. which means it was likely on her when she stole the light.
The main mechanic for this mission is a sword you can wield that can fire a projectile that destroys aberrant structures. It's the typical roadblock we've gotten used to by now. I'm just glad every mission has a different gimmick to give the illusion of variety. After you bip, bap, bam your way through some combat, you reach the apothecary.
You're trespassing on the testing grounds for the Lucent Hive's most wretched experiments.
There's some juicy world-building dialogue, using Zavala as the usual reminder that harnessing darkness is a risky procedure. The sound design for when Deep Sight is activated is particularly neat, with these ethereal pops and muted screams, subtly reminding you that your time is running out. The level is capped by a challenging encounter with some Lucent Hive, and you get your hands on the crystal.
Devotion inspires bravery. Bravery inspires sacrifice. And sacrifice.
That was Savathun, all right. But what does that mean?
Off we trot back to the altar to reveal the memory.
I've read some of Ikora's notes on the darkness and the light, Guardian. She thinks the darkness is closely linked with memory. You accessed this place with the darkness power. What exactly have we tapped into here?
It's taken a long time, but it's nice that they've finally established and explored the world-building rule that when a ghost revives you with the light, you lose your memory, with the darkness having the inverse reaction. This gives the story more depth, and is delivered through direct events in the game instead of heavy-handed, detached exposition.
I saw the end before it happened. My own death, brought on by the separation from my power. And in these final moments, I looked to the sky. Hello, old friend. I've chased you for a long time. First as an enemy, then as a collector, and finally, now, a supplicant. What is it the Guardians say? Devotion inspires bravery. Bravery inspires sacrifice. And sacrifice... Here we are. Wouldn't it be clever of you if after everything, you simply let me die? What a trick. Elegant. Is that it? If there is an answer, I don't hear it. Because now the world begins to fade.
Initially, I was kind of confused as to what exactly this meant, with only a small flash of a cutscene you can't watch anymore being the only hint as to how Savathun was injured badly enough to die in the first place. But the reveal that the Traveler was willing to bring her back with a ghost raises a fair few interesting questions, with more yet to show. With how much I've complained about monsters in this universe doing a terrible job at emoting and being so alien to the point where you have no reference point to feel any emotion or attachment, the combination of the animators working in tandem with the voice acting gives this scene its intended emotional weight, despite what you're actually looking at being a giant moth monster that couldn't possibly be less relatable on paper.
Incredible that I could forget something like that, isn't it? Such a storied life, erased. The light offers us a fresh start. But if we don't know where we came from, how will we know where to go? I'm so grateful to you for reminding me, for telling my story.
Wait. What is she talking about?
She remembers. We helped her remember.
Thanks for the memories, Guardian.
This is what I mean about the architecture of the story building upwards, instead of being buried in the lowest roots that you have to dig for to understand or see. They're finally using the elements at play to build towards something instead of running in circles. In one small scene, they have a twist reveal, build on the established lore, up the stakes of the conflict, and reinforce the lead villain's character trait of being a master manipulator. I even really like the "thanks for the memories" line.
Thanks for the memories, Guardian.
It's snide, and its literal double meaning helps her feel like she's an unstoppable force without falling into the same mustache twirling this franchise has suffered from for so long.
I knew Ikora had nothing to do with Savathun having the light. But the truth is so much worse.
So, you're saying Savathun was dead? Our most devious adversary, the one who nearly decimated the last city from within, was dead. And the Traveler resurrected her?
I wouldn't have believed it either, but
why would she need us to recover her memories if she never lost them in the first place?
This has to be another trick. A lie to fool us into surrendering the Traveler without a fight.
This has been the Traveler's approach from the beginning. The Books of Sorrow detail many civilizations it blessed with the light, then abandoned.
High propaganda.
The Fallen tell the same story. When the Witness and its Black Fleet came to call, the Traveler moved on to our system.
Where it sacrificed itself to save humanity from the same forces. Forces which included the Hive! After all that, why would the Traveler give our worst enemy the light?
It's nice to have the lead characters be in a position where they're just as confused as the audience. It makes them so much more relatable, and you feel like you're part of the ride instead of being a third wheel. The conflict is genuinely intriguing as it affects the greater world building and brings into question the entire standing of the setting. Ikora takes the worm to the relic on Mars to see if she can find answers, where more dark truths are revealed. The creative choice to show the worm awkwardly flashing through different poses is a nice horror touch, but the horror doesn't end there.
These frail siblings will soon be claimed by the light. Unless we claim them first, we will tell the most cunning sibling of a cataclysm, a prophecy of great loss. We will feed her fear, her pride. We will say, young Sathona, the end is coming. A great cataclysm. A god wave. In the sky, there is only death. But salvation lies in the deep. Lead your sisters down. Your cunning will spare their short lives. And you will be reborn, the Witch Queen.
They were tricked. The Hive were lied to.
Using these cutscenes to elaborate on lore is exactly what I've wanted from this universe. The implication being that the Witness, this creepy voice that seems to be made up of a man and woman speaking simultaneously, are responsible for the origins of the Hive, making their incoming arrival more menacing, and providing some ancient backstory that adds a sympathetic angle to the most horrifying enemies you've been fighting since the beginning.
The Hive God of Lies was lied to. This changes everything.
This idea of weaponizing memories is really neat, and is a great excuse to drop exposition and lore without it feeling awkward and clunky. And with that, it's time to tackle the final level, the ritual.
The Traveler! Ikora, the Traveler is already here. I think we're too late.
We're in the domain of the God of Cunning. Things are never what they seem. It's not too late. I can feel it. Scorn are flocking to the fortress because of the ritual. The Hive are summoning heavy reinforcements from the portal.
That will block our route into the fortress.
Hold off the Hive and the Scorn as long as you can, and leave the portal to me. I'm on my way. Hold your fire, Guardian. I've got this.
Go on. I'll draw fire here. All that matters right now is the Traveler. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, don't let it distract you from stopping the ritual.
I always appreciate when characters we know actually do something in-game to show their power instead of telling. It helps this feel like a tense last level with something at stake. After a bunch of combat, you make your way into a huge area with an invincible witch, being protected by crystals that you need to take down to proceed. This involves you exploring the immediate map in search for void charges to deactivate the corresponding crystals using teleporters. Personally, I don't particularly love this gameplay section, as at this point in the story, it feels like padding to make the level feel longer and hurts the nice urgency they'd been building up to. But it's not too bad once you figure out what is required of you.
You're back. What a surprise. Only joking. This throne world is indistinguishable from my own mind, Guardian. Every step taken, every bullet fired, every thought whispered. I keep and count them all. Remember that.
You find yourself at a lift that reminds me of the ones in Halo 2, and you're greeted by an imposing bell that looms over you, reminding you of how small your chances are in defeating such an immense and overwhelming threat. A fantastic combination of art and sound to create a memorable setting for the final showdown. The fight with Savathun begins, and on Legendary this is quite a test of patience and skill, the hardest part being figuring out a way to dodge and learn her attacks while juggling the other enemies that are dotted in the area.
There's her ghost.
Fight, run. The pattern is always the same for you. Don't you ever get tired of it? Don't you want to escape?
Right when you think the fight is over, a bridge appears and takes you to the true final arena.
My ghosts make no concessions. We serve the Traveler's true interests.
No concessions? How stupid do you think I am? You and your siblings, you killed my friends!
A really nice touch to have this location be the same as the one that appeared in the memory, bringing everything full circle, with this being the same place Savathun was born and eventually defeated. After lots of attempts, so many attempts, in fact, that I had to stop recording as to not fill my PC up with clips of me dying again and again.
She's too powerful. What do we do? We have to reactivate that portal to access the memory altar. Showing her the truth won't stop her, but we need to try.
I enjoy how the fight is broken up with you unleashing the memory of Savathun to get her on her back foot enough to deliver the finishing blow.
Focus on those wizards.
Isn't this interesting? I miscalculated. So did you, Guardian. So protective of your traveler that you wouldn't let me keep it safe. But the witness is coming. The game is yours to play now. Yours to win or lose. Just don't say I didn't warn you.
Well, that's a foreboding way to end. Again, embracing the idea that you're trapped in death as long as your ghost can't get to you, leaving the option to bring her back if there's more story to tell in the future. A much better choice than killing off a character with so much personality and potential. It's also interesting to get more evidence that the Traveler is in trouble, and perhaps that removing Savathûn from the equation is only going to expedite the collapse. She at least had some kind of plan with how she was going to deal with the witness. Humanity is hilariously uninformed and unprepared for whatever is coming. Speaking of...
We have seen enough. The children of soul cry out for salvation. You promise them life, but deliver only death, as you have for so many before. Enough. Enough death. Enough life. You have no pieces left to place. The game is over. Do not be afraid. Your pale heart holds the key. This time, there is no escape.
Okay, so what the hell am I even looking at here? When I first saw this, I was kind of thrown off by how bizarre and unlike anything in the universe it appears. But as long as you can observe it in motion, with the creepy face smoke and the ever-moving echoes of itself, I'm at least intrigued as to what this means or what it's going to bring. I've been clamoring for some kind of new enemy faction for years. Like truly new. Not a reskin, something new. And as long as Bungie doesn't come up with another excuse to reskin an already existing set of enemies, I'm hopeful that this means an entirely new gameplay flow is coming to the game. The raid boss shows that they are capable and willing, but I hope there's more than just the occasional boss encounter. With how terrible the building story has typically been for the early years of this franchise, Bungie were effectively forced into this corner where the only real option they had was to slowly build to some kind of existential threat that was looming in the background. We are naturally intrigued by what we don't know. The true problem comes with when and how you get the answers. Mysteries and questions are easy to throw out there, but time and time again have stories flubbed the landing when it comes to satisfying reveals that don't undo said intrigue that had been meticulously built. I'm genuinely curious how Bungie's going to attempt to address this. With so many threads and spinning plates, they have no choice but to deliver something exciting and different. And with the promise of Lightfall, as the name suggests, it's looking like we may be fighting a losing battle. In fact, I hope so. A true Ragnarok event would totally refresh the story, especially if all this foreshadowing of the Traveler running away does bear fruit, maybe leaving humanity in a position where they have to embrace some kind of new subclass in order to stand a chance. With the public statement that the final shape is going to officially end this saga, that leaves room for a true low point in Lightfall, often the most dire and exciting point of any ongoing story. The potential is all there, it's just a matter of how they stick the landing. So with that said and done, that's the Witch Queen campaign. Of course there are other bits and bobs to explore and complete, but nothing quite as polished and interesting as these main missions, and I actually want to release and complete this video at some point. This campaign puts all the previous Destiny campaigns to shame, and has set a new standard with what to expect from these major expansions in this regard. However, the conversation isn't over. There's a lot more to this game than just the story missions, and why I'm still kind of torn in if I could truly recommend this to people. Here's the thing. I mentioned earlier how Bungie have yet to release a content drop that doesn't sag in any of the core pillars, and for a game that promises to house all of these different playstyles and gameplay types, it's kind of a problem. Sure, the campaign on its own is a step in the right direction, but outside of it, what do we have? Or more so, what do we not have? The gameplay loop, once the story is over, usually devolves into a mixture of activities that are designed to be open enough to appeal to different types of players. For example, do you like strikes and nightfalls, gambit, competitive PvP, raids and dungeons, or map exploration and public events? Each one of these is supposed to represent a core pillar that holds up most of the replay value, except most of these activities have not been properly tweaked or given the love they need for such a long time that taking part in so many of them feels like a grindy, repetitive waste. To compare some numbers for a minute, the Forsaken expansion introduced 2 entirely new locations, the Gambit game mode with 4 maps, 4 strikes, 5 PvP maps, and a raid. Beyond Light introduced 1 new location, 2 new strikes, and 1 raid. The Witch Queen introduced 1 new location, 1 new raid, and 2 new strikes. The point I'm trying to make is as far as overall content is concerned, it's inconsistent and all over the place. You never quite know what you're going to get, and each expansion only satisfies certain members of its intended multiple sub-audiences. The main 3 playlists especially are bare bones and have suffered greatly from the need to vault older content, and are simply not meeting the promise of appealing to the different pillars. It's such a shame that it's largely impossible to pull from the full swath of legacy PvP maps and strikes because of the limitations of this game's breadth. In theory, there should be so much content available that I could jump into the Strike playlist for a couple of hours and not see a single repeat. The opposite is often the case. This would not be as much of a problem if it was not encouraged of you as the core loop to how you level up. So especially in the case of activities such as Gambit, where it's still the same maps as Forsaken, which released in 2018, you have irrelevant feeling game modes which are a victim of Bungie being forced to focus on pockets of development, especially with the split from Activision minimizing production scope. For me to ever care about this game in the way I used to, they would need to figure out a way to trim the fat and simultaneously expand the content variety that doesn't have me groaning at how repetitive and small the overall game feels in certain key areas. As someone who always enjoyed the Strike playlist in Destiny 1, it's never scratched the same itch in Destiny 2. The mere fact that I played Destiny Vanilla so much is weirdly ruining my time with Destiny 2. Sure, it's great that you're bringing all this old stuff back, like the Vault of Glass, but I've already played that raid countless times, and this is exactly why I was against a Destiny 2 to begin with. I know the shareholders wanted a Destiny 2, but the shift to a sequel just didn't make sense, just like it doesn't for a modern counterpart like Overwatch. Except somehow Bungie managed to get away with it. Different times, I guess. This brings us back, like it always does, to the core live service problem. I hate to be in a position where I'm praising a game for features such as difficulty options, which was literally in vanilla Destiny until they randomly took them out at some point, and is standard in basically every other game available. It forces me to ask the question, would this game have been better if they just built something with a stable foundation that could be played at your own pace, with a complete timeline full of events that could be experienced as many times as you like, much like every single other entertainment medium that has ever existed, including games? The pros to cons for this live service business model does not seem to add up for how much is lost overall, with basically every major positive leaning towards the developer. Be it how it's impossible to criticize as it's always changing, how you don't own any of the content you're paying for that can disappear at a moment's notice, how your time is manipulated on the game's terms to try and maximize engagement with gross Skinner box design that abuses the human brain's dopamine release cycle and fear of missing out, or how content over the years has gradually been split up into various special editions to nudge you into spending extra for exclusive exotics or activities in the game that's about collecting things. So all these mind games, it feels like a constant battle before you're even in combat. In 5 years' time, quality of life updates aside, I'm going to be able to sit down with Elden Ring and have a similarly enjoyable experience that I did the day it came out. I can load up Halo 3 whenever I feel like and play my favorite moments. My time with Destiny is ironically limited to memories, much like the villain of The Witch Queen. Not all art is permanent, and video games are unique in how they're able to be updated and improved upon, but there's something about this shambled implementation that doesn't feel like it's fair to its passionate audience, and is effectively impossible to get into for anyone that isn't already in. And as I said, it's not like the story is complicated. So many compliments toward this game come from the veteran fanbase who have fallen into the sunken cost fallacy. I was there once, and breaking the cycle was a light bulb moment for me. This game is bewildering to players old and new. In some ways, it's even more complicated for fans like me, who have outdated knowledge based on how the game used to work. So seeing currencies or systems return that you vaguely recognize, but this time have a different purpose, can be truly confusing. Let alone if you find this game appealing and want to give it a try, but have to go through the painful process of learning to maximize your gameplay. Now, some may call this depth, but I tend to describe this more so as needlessly overwhelming and complicated. So you have the core power level grind, which is the heart of the loot loop. This is what people grind to maximize each content drop. A loop I personally get very little excitement from. It just feels like a number going up that barely affects gameplay. Why would I grind to get to max power when in a few months when the next season drops, I can just do a couple of easy activities and skyrocket past the old cap in no time at all. You have gear management, sifting through menus to delete duplicates when your inventory is full, with no simple or easy to identify indicators that the loop that dropped is not a repeat or something you already own. In fact, this system is so clunky that most hardcore players use external gear management applications such as the Destiny Item Manager, an absolute must if you play this at any level above the most casual possible. While we're on the topic of external apps, why not mention Today in Destiny or D2 Checklist, websites built to help you manage your time with information displayed in a much easier to follow list than anything that exists in the game proper. Which brings me onto the bounty system, the most effective channel for leveling up, which instead of being background trackers that automatically reward you for certain milestones, require you to manually pick up specific challenges from vendors or through the mobile companion app, as a nasty way to get you to spend glimmer currency on a short-time challenge that makes you feel like you're missing out if you don't get them done in time after you buy them, as they expire in a day or so. This is alongside seasonal challenges that you don't have to acquire, but just have to remember to click on them when they're complete, as well as systems like the seasonal artifact that help you alleviate the power level grind. Then there are features like the XP boosts that you have to remember to equip to your Ghost mod slot. On top of that are limited time consumables that you buy with silver or sometimes drop as rewards. Then there's the terrible stingy transmog system, a great idea for a game all about cosmetics, but of course the currencies that are required to do it are so minimal and balanced to encourage you spending silver, so why would I ever want to sink time into something so blatantly thrifty? The same can be said for weapon crafting or gear upgrades, which I don't think you can pay to speed up but actively discourage experimentation unless you're the 1% of hardcore addicts with the materials to spare. The currency situation is beyond a joke. The original proposed transmog system was so ridiculous with how many currencies it was going to introduce that Bungie actually had to remove a step to try to simplify the process. All of this is absurd. Sit someone down in a detached combat scenario, and there's no doubt you'll hear nothing but compliments as far as the game feel is concerned. It's genuinely really fun and interactive. The shooting mechanics are the reason this game has stuck where Avengers or Anthem died a death. It has no direct competition, so it can do whatever it wants and the fans just have to deal with it. Instead of feeling like I'm overwhelmed by how many menus and systems I have to learn in order to improve my gameplay experience, I often ask, why does it have to be this way? This is stupid. If the answer is not for the sole reason of purposefully wasting my time to keep me playing. When listing out all this stuff, it actually makes me sound like I've gone insane, I've lost my mind. And trying to keep track of all of it is kind of a game in and of itself that obsessive people like me can get lost in, but more like a boring game that's akin to sending an email. I'm not alone in thinking that this game is almost more of a lifestyle than a video game. It makes it very difficult to be a casual fan, and no matter what approach I take, I always feel like I'm playing the game the wrong way. I'll continue to check out the major content drops to play through the campaigns, because my Stockholm Syndrome is just too deeply rooted at this point, but the game will probably always be a disappointment to me because of this approach. Destiny fans will often surmise how the raids are the true content, the cream of the crop, the real reason to justify the grind. And to an extent, I agree, but even this brings a host of problems. For this video I tried out the LFG system that Bungie houses on their website, the only realistic way to take part in endgame content without committing to a clan or having friends that play, and the whole experience kind of reminded me of why I stopped raiding to begin with. There's no doubt that this system works better than the third-party websites from back in the day, but the gatekeeping continues to be off the charts, and I don't understand why it can't function within the game. If you're lucky, you might be able to find a group that is willing to Sherpa you to teach you the mechanics you're not familiar with, without trying to charge you for the privilege. But the time required to get to this point is often not worth the headache. I eventually managed to find a cool group of dudes who are willing to put up with my lack of knowledge, but the majority of players are looking for KWTD, and will kick you if you don't KWTD. So in turn, I tend to KWIT even bothering. Once I finally got into the flow of the new raid, I did have a good time. The environments were as impressive and alien as I was expecting. The final boss was new and challenging with how aggressive it was. Barrier to entry aside, I'm glad I gave it a chance. In contrast to my experience revisiting the older Vault of Glass raid, tucked away in the legacy corner of the map directory. There was this one guy who was a needlessly angsty, aggressive asshole who made the environment generally unpleasant. I guess the raid is only as enjoyable as the people you can get to play it with you. God, I wish I could play this content solo without having to interact with 12-year-old Zoomers.
Alright. Become invisible, we stay behind.
My journey with this game has taught me a valuable lesson about a lot of different things, be it optimism, disappointment, mindless fandom, the power of advertising compared to reality, manipulative game design, and my own addictive tendencies. And this core question of what is enough content? What is quality content? What is consistency of content? And what is even fair to mention or criticize for a live service product? The answer to a lot of these is going to be totally subjective and comes down to your own beliefs and experience. However, the story is not yet over, with the collection of dramatic exposés seeming to only increase with time. Who knows how this game is going to sit once it's truly over? But as of right now, I kind of hate how and where it's gone, and how it's affected the industry and expectations at large. I'm just glad I had the time to explain the time I had to explain. God damn, this video took a long time. I've worked on it constantly for months, fully abandoning it 2 or 3 times, trying to figure out a way to structure and organize my boatload of footage and opinions. Man, I got so much footage. I've been collecting it all since, I guess, 2014. Making videos this expansive is not really my forte, so it was a learning process to be sure. A painful one. It's not like I was working on it non-stop for 6 months, but let's just say my life got in the way a little bit. Since I started my channel in 2013, I've been continuously pushing my own happiness and well-being into the background for the sake of maximizing my output as an obsessive workaholic, and I think a lot of YouTubers figured this out around like 2020, so combining that with catching COVID twice and suffering with lingering brain fog issues since, my dog had to get an operation, which sucked. That was like a month down the drain. And various personal relationship drama. I've needed to do some introspection and figure out how to restructure my life in a way that's more overall balanced. This obviously murdered my video output, but something had to give at a certain point. I'm by no means done with YouTube, it's just more that videos take time. Lots of time, especially when they're this long, and I do everything myself. I'm considering perhaps hiring a freelance video editor or two to help lighten the load for some videos that I have planned. Send me a tweet or email or something if that sounds interesting to you and you've got a bit of experience. I've turned on the channel member feature if you want like more direct dialogue with me. I really can't stand most social media platforms as they seem to be getting more and more predatory by the day, especially your Twitters and TikToks. But funneling people through the member feature seems like a better way of building a community I can talk to about what I'm working on next and give ideas to bounce off of without so much other noise. I hope you enjoyed the video and I look forward to reading your feedback and thoughts. Watch Sardonicast and Jarcast. Bye!